My dad has your exact bike. The words left Lily Carter's mouth in a whisper, and the man across the counter went still as stone. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. Three other leather-clad men at the table turned their heads in unison like they'd all heard a gunshot. Nobody said a word for 5 full seconds. Then the biggest one among them, graybeard, cold eyes, slowly set his cup down and asked in a voice that made the whole diner go quiet, "Say that again." Hi everyone, before we dive into this story, if you're new here, welcome. I tell stories about ordinary people who find extraordinary courage and about the Hell's Angels who show up when nobody else will. If this story moves you, hit subscribe and please drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from tonight. I read every single one, and it means the world to me to know how far these stories travel. Now let's begin. Colorado had a way of making a person feel small. Lily Carter had learned that lesson slowly over 7 months of mornings that all bled into each other mornings, where the mountains sat there in the distance, indifferent while she wiped down the same sticky counter and refilled the same cracked coffee pots and pretended for the 100th time that everything was fine. The truck stop diner sat off Interstate 70 like a scar on the landscape, a low building with a flickering sign that said "Eat," and a parking lot full of long-haul trucks that came and went like the tide. Lily had been working there since the beginning of the year. Some of the older waitresses liked to say the place had a soul, that it had seen 3 generations of truckers pass through, that there was something almost sacred about a diner that never closed. Lily used to think that was a nice sentiment. Now she just thought it was a cage with good lighting. She wiped her hands on her apron and looked toward the kitchen window where Victor Haynes stood watching her the way he always watched her, like a man inspecting a piece of equipment to make sure it hadn't broken down on him yet. He didn't smile. Victor rarely smiled at his employees. He smiled at customers, at inspectors, at anyone who might write him a check or sign a permit. For the people who worked for him, he saved a different expression entirely. Flat, assessing. Patient in a way that made her skin crawl. "Table 4 needs their check," he said, not looking away from her arm. "I know, Victor. I've got it. I didn't ask if you knew. I told you to do it." She swallowed the response that rose in her throat, the one that would have cost her another week of pay if she'd let it out and walked toward table 4 with a smile plastered onto her face like a mask she'd worn so long she sometimes forgot it wasn't real anymore. 7 months. 7 months since she'd signed what she thought was a simple employment contract. 7 months since Victor Haynes had started explaining in that calm, reasonable voice of his about training fees, about uniform deposits, about equipment costs that somehow always came out of her paycheck before she ever saw it. 7 months of watching her supposed wages evaporate into a ledger she wasn't allowed to see, into debts that grew instead of shrank into promises that next month would be different. Next month was never different. She had tried to leave once back in April. She still remembered the conversation, could still feel the way her stomach had dropped when Victor had leaned back in his office chair and said so casually, like he was discussing the weather, "You understand, if you walk out on this contract before it's paid off, I'm well within my rights to pursue you for the full remaining balance. $12,000, Lily. You want to explain that to a judge because I've got the paperwork and you signed it." She hadn't signed anything that said $12,000. She was almost certain of that. But she also didn't have a lawyer, didn't have money for one, didn't have a family nearby to call, didn't have anywhere to go if she did manage to leave. Her mother had passed when Lily was 16. Her father, Daniel Carter, lived alone up in the mountains, a quiet, private man who'd raised her by himself after that, who'd taught her to fish and to change a tire and to never, ever, under any circumstances, ignore her gut. And her gut had been screaming at her for months now. She thought about her father more in these last 7 months than she had in years. She thought about the strange, almost sacred way he'd sat her down when she was 17 years old, right before she left for her first job away from home, and told her something that had made absolutely no sense at the time. "Lily," he'd said, his weathered hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, his eyes somewhere far away. "I need you to remember something. Might sound crazy, might never matter, but I need you to hold on to it anyway." "Okay, Dad." "If you're ever in trouble, real trouble, the kind where you don't know who to call, where you're scared, where you feel like there's no way out, and if you ever see a Hell's Angels rider on a black 1980 lowrider with a patch on the back that says Iron Wolves chapter, you go up to him. Doesn't matter who he is, doesn't matter if you've never seen his face before in your life. You go up to him and you don't explain anything. You just say 6 words. My dad has your exact bike. That's it. That's all you say. She'd laugh. She remembered that now she'd actually laughed a nervous 18-year-old laugh and asked him why on earth that would matter, why a group of strangers on motorcycles would care about anything she said to them. Her father hadn't laughed back. Just remember it, he'd said. Promise me. I promise, Dad. She hadn't thought about that conversation in years. Not really. It had become one of those strange, half-forgotten instructions parents give their children, filed away somewhere in the back of her mind, next to don't touch the stove and always wear your seatbelt. She'd never had a reason to think about it again. Until this Thursday morning when 4 Hells Angels walked through the diner's front door. She noticed them the way anyone would notice them. The leather vests, the patches, the sheer size of the men, as they folded themselves into a corner booth like they were trying not to break the furniture. She noticed, too, through the window, the motorcycles parked outside gleaming under the morning sun, 4 of them lined up in a neat row, and one of them was black, a black 1980 lowrider. Her hands went cold before her mind even caught up to what she was seeing. She stood frozen behind the counter, coffee pot in hand, staring through the window at that motorcycle like it was a ghost, like it had ridden straight out of a memory she hadn't visited in 5 years. Table 2? Lily, Victor's voice cut through her thoughts. Are you working today or not? She startled, nearly dropped the pot, and turned to see him standing in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, watching her with that flat, patient expression that always made her stomach tighten. Sorry, I'm going. She made herself walk, made herself breathe, made herself approach the booth in the corner where 4 enormous men sat looking at menus like they hadn't just parked something that might be the most important object in her entire life outside the front door. Morning, she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. Can I start you off with some coffee? Please, said the toy-clothed one, a heavy-set man with a gray beard and eyes that missed nothing. Black all around. She poured. Her hands trembled slightly, just enough that she prayed none of them noticed, and she kept her eyes on the cups instead of the men, because she was terrified that if she looked up, she would lose whatever nerve was currently keeping her upright. You all right, sweetheart? One of them asked, not unkindly. A younger one, maybe 35, with tattoos crawling up his forearms, and a gentleness in his voice that surprised her. I'm fine, she said automatically. Just tired. Long shift. She should have walked away then. She should have gone back behind the counter, finished her shift, gone home to her tiny rented room, and let the whole strange coincidence pass without another thought. That would have been the safe thing to do, the reasonable thing. But she thought about her father's face that day, the seriousness in it, the way he'd made her promise, and she thought about 12 months, no, 7 months. Though it felt like 12 of Victor Haynes controlling every dollar she earned, every hour she worked, every decision about her own life, and something in her chest cracked open. She set the coffee pot down on the table. Can I ask you something, she said, and her voice shook now, no hiding it. That motorcycle outside, the black one, do you all ride together? The gray-bearded man looked up at her properly for the first time, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. That's my bike, he said slowly. Why do you ask? Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might be audible. Every instinct in her told her this was insane, that she was about to say something to a group of strangers that would either mean absolutely nothing to them or would mean everything, and she wouldn't know which until it was already out of her mouth. She thought of her father's hands wrapped around that coffee mug 5 years ago. She thought of his voice, quiet and certain. Just remember it. Promise me. My dad has your exact bike, she said. The diner didn't go silent. The other customers kept talking, kept clinking, forks against plates, kept living their ordinary Thursday morning lives, completely unaware that something had just shifted at the corner booth. But for the 4 men sitting there, everything stopped. The gray-bearded man's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. The younger one with the tattoos turned his head so fast Lily heard his neck crack. The other 2 exchanged a look that Lily couldn't read at all, something between disbelief and alarm. Say that again, the gray-bearded man said, and his voice had changed completely. Gone was the casual warmth from a moment ago. This was something else, something sharper. Lily's mouth had gone dry. She glanced instinctively toward the kitchen, where she could see Victor's shape moving behind the pass-through window, and she lowered her voice to almost nothing. My dad has your exact bike, she whispered again. That's, that's all I was told to say. I don't even know what it means. I'm sorry, this is probably crazy. What's your father's name? The man interrupted, and now he was leaning forward, both hands flat on the table, every ounce of casual diner customer energy gone from his body. Daniel, she said, Daniel Carter. The man's face changed in a way Lily would remember for the rest of her life. It was like watching 20 years fall away from someone in real time, like watching a wall crack open and something long buried come pouring out. His eyes, which had been sharp and assessing a moment ago, went wide, then wet, then something that looked almost like grief. Daniel Carter, he repeated like he was testing whether the name was real. Daniel Carter is your father. Yes. Jesus, the man breathed, and he sat back hard against the booth like he'd been struck. The younger man beside him, the tattooed one, was staring at his president with an expression of pure shock. Grizzly, the younger one said quietly. Grizzly, that's Iron Wolves. That's 20 years ago. That's before I even patched in. I know what it is, Cole, Grizzly said, and there was something raw in his voice now. Something that made Lily take a step back, suddenly terrified she'd unlocked something she had no business unlocking. I know exactly what it is. He looked up at her again, and this time his expression had softened into something almost tender, though his jaw was tight with restrained emotion. Sweetheart, he said, is your father all right? Is he safe? I think so. He lives up in the mountains. I don't see him much these days. I've been working here for... She stopped herself. She hadn't meant to say anything about her situation, hadn't meant to let anything slip about Victor or the diner or the 7 months of quiet suffocation she'd been enduring. But something in Grizzly's face told her he'd already noticed far more than she wanted him to. Working here, Grizzly repeated slowly, his eyes moving over her, taking in details she hadn't realized were visible. The way her uniform hung slightly loose like she'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. The dark circles under her eyes. The way she kept glancing nervously toward the kitchen every few seconds. Lily, Victor's voice snapped across the diner, and she flinched so violently that coffee sloshed over the rim of the pot in her hand. Table 6 is waiting. Coming, she called back, and when she turned back to the booth, her face had rearranged itself into that mask again. That careful, practiced calm. I need to go, she whispered. Please forget I said anything. I shouldn't have. Wait. Grizzly's hand came up, not touching her, but stopping her all the same with the sheer authority in his voice. What's your name? Lily Carter. Lily, he said it like he was memorizing it. You go on and do your job. Don't look nervous. Don't look at us again. Just work like normal. You understand me? She nodded, confused, terrified, and strangely for the first time in 7 months, not entirely alone. Lily. Victor's voice cracked across the room again, and she hurried away from the booth without looking back, though she felt Grizzly's eyes on her the entire way. She didn't see what happened next because she was busy at table 6 refilling water glasses with hands that wouldn't quite stop shaking. But if she had been watching, she would have seen Grizzly Donovan set down enough cash to cover 4 breakfasts and a hefty tip stand up from the booth and walk outside without a word to anyone. She would have seen him take out his phone, lean against his motorcycle, and make a call that would set an entire chain of events into motion. A chain that had been 20 years in the making and was about to arrive all at once on a Thursday morning in a truck stop diner off Interstate 70. Jack Donovan Grizzly, to everyone who'd known him for more than a decade, stood beside his black lowrider with his phone pressed to his ear, watching his own hand tremble slightly as he waited for the call to connect. 20 years. 20 years since he'd heard that name spoken out loud. 20 years since he'd let himself think too hard about Daniel Carter, about the highway, about the crash that should have killed him, if not for one man's steady hands and quick thinking. The call connected. Yeah, said a rough voice on the other end. Marcus, Jack said, it's me. I need you to pull everything you can on a diner off I-70 mile markers, gonna be somewhere near Idaho Springs. Owner's name is Victor Haynes. I need it fast. What's going on, Grizzly? Jack looked back through the diner window, watching Lily move between tables with that careful, frightened grace of someone who'd learned to make herself small, learned to survive by staying invisible. Daniel Carter's daughter just walked up to my table, he said, and told me she needs help. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Daniel Carter, Marcus repeated slowly. The Daniel Carter. The Daniel Martyr. Christ, Grizzly, I thought he was gone. Disappeared off the map, what, 15, 16 years ago? 19, Jack said quietly, after Sarah died. Another pause, heavier this time, both men remembering things neither of them wanted to say out loud. Okay, Marcus said finally, his voice all business now. Give me 20 minutes. I'll pull business licenses, employment complaints, anything with Haynes's name on it. Do it quiet. I don't want anyone spooked before we know what we're dealing with. You got it. Jack hung up and stood there a moment longer, staring at the diner through the glass, watching Lily's small, tense figure move behind the counter like a woman walking on ice she knew could crack at any moment. He thought about the last time he'd seen Daniel Carter's face 20 years ago, bloodied and desperate on the side of a highway, dragging Jack's unconscious body away from a burning motorcycle seconds before it went up in flames. He thought about the years after, the awkward distance that had grown between them, the way grief had turned Daniel into someone who didn't answer phone calls anymore, didn't show up to gatherings, didn't want anything to do with the brotherhood that had once been as close to him as family. Jack had let him go. That was the truth of it, the ugly truth he'd never said out loud to anyone. He'd let his friend disappear into grief and isolation because reaching out had felt too hard, too painful, too much like intruding on something private. He'd told himself Daniel needed space. He'd told himself that for 19 years. And now Daniel's daughter was standing behind a diner counter, thin and frightened, and clearly trapped in something, silently asking for the one thing her father had told her to ask for if she was ever truly desperate. Jack walked back inside. The other three men at the table looked up at him as he sat back down, and he could see the questions in their eyes, but he waved them off with a small shake of his head. Not yet. Not here. Cole, he said quietly to the tattooed man beside him. You remember the story I told you a couple years back about the crash that took my leg out for 6 months? Cole's eyes widened slightly. The one where some guy pulled you off the highway before the bike blew. That's the one. That was her father. That's her father. Jack glanced toward the counter where Lily was refilling coffee for a table of truckers, her movements quick and economical, a woman who'd clearly learned to work fast and stay quiet. And something's very wrong here, Cole. You see how she flinches every time that man in the kitchen raises his voice? Cole followed his gaze toward the kitchen window where Victor Haynes stood watching the dining room with the same cold proprietary expression he'd worn all morning. Yeah, Cole said slowly. I noticed. I want you to sit here. Order more food if you have to. Watch. Don't approach her again. Don't make it obvious. Just watch. I need to know what we're looking at before we do anything. What are you going to do? I'm going to find out everything there is to know about Victor Haynes, Jack said, standing around, and then I'm going to call Daniel. He walked back outside past the row of motorcycles, past the black lowrider that had somehow impossibly been the key that unlocked 20 years of silence in a single sentence. He pulled out his phone again, scrolled through contacts he hadn't touched in years, and found a number he wasn't even certain still worked. He hesitated with his thumb over the call button. What was he supposed to say? Hey, Daniel, it's been 19 years. Sorry I never called your daughter, just told me she needs help, and I have no idea what's actually happening to her. It felt inadequate. It felt like nowhere near enough for the weight of what he was about to do. He pressed call anyway. It rang 4 times. 5. Jack's chest tightened with each unanswered ring, old guilt curdling into fresh anxiety, until finally on the 6th ring, a rough, unfamiliar voice picked up. Hello. Daniel. Jack's voice cracked slightly on the name. Daniel, it's Jack. Jack Donovan. Silence on the other end, long enough that Jack thought the call had dropped. Jack, Daniel finally said, and his voice sounded older than Jack remembered, rougher, worn down by years Jack hadn't been there to witness. It's been a long time. 19 years, Jack said quietly. I know it has, and I know I should have called before now. And I owe you an apology. I don't have time to give you properly right now because, Daniel, I'm sitting in a diner off I-70 near Idaho Springs, and your daughter is standing about 30 feet away from me, and I think she's in trouble. The silence that followed was different this time. Sharp, alert. What kind of trouble? Daniel's voice had changed completely, all the roughness replaced by something hard and focused. I don't know yet, but she said the 6 words, Daniel. She walked up to my table and said them exactly like you must have taught her. And she looks scared and she looks thin, and every time her boss raises his voice, she flinches like she's been trained to. Another silence, this one heavy with something that sounded like restrained fury. His name, Daniel said. Give me his name. Victor Haynes owns the place, calls himself the manager, but from the way he's watching that dining room, I'd bet money he owns it outright. Jack. Daniel's voice had dropped to something low and dangerous, a tone Jack hadn't heard from his old friend in 2 decades. I need you to do something for me. I need you to make sure my daughter is safe until I get there. I'm 40 minutes out, maybe less if the roads are clear. Daniel, before you come tearing down that mountain, let me get some information first. I've got a man already pulling records. Let's know what we're dealing with before. Jack. Daniel's voice cut through him like a blade. 7 months ago, Lily told me she'd taken a job at a diner to save up money before starting community college. She said the pay was decent, said the hours were long, but manageable. I talked to her twice since then, maybe 3 times, and every time the conversation got shorter, and every time she sounded more tired, and every time I told myself I was imagining things because that's easier than facing the truth that something might be wrong. I didn't push. I told myself she was just busy building her own life. His voice broke slightly on the last words. I am not making that mistake again, he said. Not with my daughter, not after everything. Jack closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 19 years of silence pressing down on his chest. Then get down here, he said. But Daniel, come in calm. If this is what it looks like, we do this right. We do this legal and clean, and we make sure it sticks. You go in there swinging, and you'll give Haynes every excuse he needs to twist this into something it isn't. I hear you. Daniel's breathing was ragged on the other end of the line, the sound of a man moving fast, grabbing keys, heading for a door. I hear you, Jack. Just watch her, please. Just watch my daughter until I get there. I will. I promise you I will. The line went dead. Jack stood in the parking lot for a long moment, phone still in his hand, staring at the diner's flickering eat sign, feeling the full weight of what was happening settle onto his shoulders. 20 years of guilt, and now suddenly an opportunity to do something about it. He wasn't going to waste it. He walked back inside, sat back down across from Cole, and forced his expression into something calm, something that wouldn't draw attention. Her father's coming, he said quietly. How long? 40 minutes if the roads are good. Cole glanced toward the kitchen window where Victor Haynes was now standing in the doorway, arms crossed, his eyes moving over the dining room, with the slow, methodical suspicion of a man who sensed something had changed but couldn't yet identify what. He's watching us, Cole murmured. Let him watch, Jack said. We're just 4 guys eating breakfast. Nothing suspicious about that. But even as he said it, Jack felt the tension coiling in his chest, the sense that they were sitting inside a powder keg that could ignite at any moment, and that 40 minutes was either going to feel like an eternity or nowhere near enough time at all. His phone buzzed. Marcus. What have you got? Jack answered quietly, keeping his voice low enough that only Cole could hear. Grizzly, it's worse than I thought, Marcus said, and there was something in his voice, some grim urgency that made Jack's stomach drop. I pulled everything I could find in the last 15 minutes. Victor Haynes has owned that diner for 6 years. In that time, there have been at least 11 separate labor complaints filed against him with the state, every single one of them dismissed or withdrawn before it went anywhere. Withdrawn how? That's the question, isn't it? Every complainant either recanted or simply disappeared off the radar. No follow-up, no paper trail, nothing. And Grizzly. I found something else. Property records show Haynes has 3 other business licenses under different LLCs, all registered to the same address. Looks like he's been running some kind of employment scheme for years, moving people through these businesses, and every single one of them has the exact same pattern. Young employees, isolated situations, wage garnishment that never seems to end. Jack's jaw tightened. How many people are we talking about? I don't know yet. Could be dozens over the years. Could be more. I need more time to dig, but Grizzly, whatever your girl walked into, she's not the first one, and if we don't move carefully, she won't be the last one either. Jack looked across the diner toward the counter where Lily stood pouring coffee with hands that still trembled, slightly unaware that the quiet chaos she'd unleashed with 6 whispered words was only just beginning. Keep digging, Jack said quietly, and Marcus, call Reyes. Tell her we might need legal on standby, and tell her to keep it quiet for now. I don't want Haynes getting wind of any of this before her father arrives. On it, Jack ended the call and sat back in the booth, his mind racing through possibilities, contingencies, everything that could go right and everything that could go catastrophically wrong in the next 40 minutes. He thought about Daniel tearing down a mountain road with 19 years of unspoken guilt fueling every mile. He thought about Lily standing 30 feet away, completely unaware of the storm that was building around her. And he thought about Victor Haynes, watching the dining room with those cold, calculating eyes, sensing that something had shifted, even if he didn't yet know what. "Cole," Jack said quietly, "text the others. Tell them to come." Quietly. No engines revving into the lot, no drawing attention. Just start arriving one or two at a time like it's nothing unusual. Cole raised an eyebrow. "How many?" "All of them," Jack said. "Every patch member within 30 miles. I want this parking lot full within the hour." Cole didn't argue. He simply pulled out his phone and began typing, and within moments a message was spreading across a network that had existed for decades. A call that very few members ever received and even fewer ever ignored. "Family needs us." Across the dining room, Victor Haynes watched the four bikers with growing unease, though he couldn't have said exactly why. Something about the stillness of them, the way they sat without ordering more food, the way their eyes tracked movements around the diner with far more attention than four hungry truckers eating breakfast should have shown. He glanced toward Lily, who was topping off coffee at the counter, and something in her posture bothered him too, though he told himself it was nothing. Told himself he was being paranoid. She'd worked for him for 7 months without causing any real trouble. She knew what happened to employees who caused trouble. She'd seen it happen to others. Watched them threatened into silence or quietly disappeared from the schedule until they simply stopped showing up, too afraid or too broken to fight back. Victor didn't believe in loose ends. He'd built his business on making sure there weren't any. But something about this morning felt different, felt wrong in a way he couldn't quite name, and Victor Haynes had learned over years of running his particular brand of business to trust that feeling above almost anything else. He walked out from behind the kitchen window and made his way toward the counter, his footsteps deliberate, his eyes fixed on Lily. "Lily," he said low enough that only she could hear. A word. She flinched, set down the coffee pot with careful precision, and followed him toward the back hallway near the restrooms, her heart hammering with a fear that had become as familiar to her as breathing. "Yes, Victor." "Those men in the corner booth," he said, his eyes narrow, studying her face for any flicker of guilt. "You said something to them, I saw you." "I just asked if they wanted more coffee." "Don't lie to me, Lily." His voice stayed quiet, controlled, but there was an edge to it now that made her stomach twist into knots. "I've been doing this a long time. I know what a frightened conversation looks like. What did you say to them?" She stared at him, at the man who had controlled every aspect of her life for 7 months, who had taken her paychecks and her freedom and her sense of who she used to be. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something other than fear rise up inside her. She felt hope, because whatever those 6 words meant, whatever strange power they carried, she had watched them transform a stranger's face from casual friendliness into something fierce and protective in the space of a single breath. And she had watched that same man walk outside and make a phone call with the urgency of someone setting something enormous into motion. For the first time in 7 months, Lily Carter didn't feel entirely alone. "I told them the coffee was fresh," she said, meeting Victor's eyes for the first time in longer than she could remember. "That's all, Victor." His eyes narrowed further, studying her, searching for the lie he was certain was hiding somewhere in her expression. But whatever he saw or didn't see seemed to satisfy him just enough, because after a long moment, he stepped back. "Get back to work," he said. "And Lily, if I find out you've been talking to customers about things that don't concern them, you'll regret it. You understand me?" "I understand." She walked back out into the dining room, past the counter, past the row of booths, and glanced just once toward the corner where the 4 bikers sat. Jack caught her eye across the room, and though he didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't do anything that might draw Victor's attention, something passed between them in that brief glance. A promise, a silent understanding. Hold on, his eyes seemed to say. Help is coming. And outside in the parking lot, the first additional motorcycle pulled in, engine quiet rider dismounting with the casual, unhurried movement of a man simply stopping for breakfast. He wasn't. Within the hour, 20 more would follow him, then 30 gathering with a patience and discipline that would have terrified Victor Haynes had he understood what he was actually looking at. But he didn't understand. Not yet. He walked back into his kitchen, back to his ledgers and his schedules, and the careful web of control he'd spent 6 years constructing, completely unaware that somewhere on a mountain road 40 minutes away, a father was driving faster than he had in years. Jaw set, eyes hard, carrying 19 years of guilt and a lifetime of love toward a daughter who had finally desperately asked for help. Completely unaware that the calm, quiet men sitting in his corner booth were not simply eating breakfast. They were waiting. And in exactly 38 minutes, everything Victor Haynes had built was going to start coming apart one careful, deliberate piece at a time. 31 minutes. That was how long it took Daniel Carter to descend a mountain road he normally drove, with careful, measured patience, the kind of patience that came from decades of respecting switchbacks and black ice and the unforgiving drop just beyond the guardrail. That morning, none of it mattered to him. His truck's engine roared through curves he took faster than he had in 15 years, gravel spitting from his tires, his knuckles bone white against the steering wheel. He didn't cry. He wanted to. He hadn't let himself cry since Sarah's funeral had trained himself out of it the way a man trains himself out of a bad habit. But as the truck screamed down toward the highway, toward his daughter, toward whatever nightmare he had failed to notice building, for 7 straight months, something hot and furious pressed against the back of his throat. 7 months. She had told him she was fine 7 months ago, and he had believed her because believing her was easier than driving down and checking for himself. He had let his own grief keep him isolated on that mountain for 19 years, had let it cost him. His friendship with Jack had let it cost him God knew how many moments with his own daughter, and now it had almost cost him something he couldn't survive losing. Not this, not her. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. He grabbed it, one-handed, glanced at the screen. Jack. Talk to me, Daniel said, voice raw. She's fine, Jack said, immediately understanding exactly what Daniel needed to hear first. She's working her shift. Nothing's happened. Haynes hasn't touched her. I've got eyes on her every second. How far out is he, Haynes? Where is he right now? In the kitchen. Hasn't left it in 20 minutes. A pause. Daniel, listen to me. We got some information back already, and it's bad, real bad. This isn't just about your daughter. This man's been running the same operation for years, multiple businesses, all under different names, and there's a pattern of complaints that keep getting dropped or disappearing. Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel until his knuckles ached. How many people, Jack? We don't know yet. Could be a lot. My guy's still digging. Then dig faster. Daniel took the next curve harder than he should have, the truck's tires screaming briefly against asphalt. I want him gone, Jack. Not just fired, gone. In cuffs, in court, whatever it takes. That's exactly why I need you to slow down and think clearly before you get here. Jack said, his voice firm in a way Daniel remembered from 20 years ago, the voice of a man who'd once talked him through changing a tire on the shoulder of a highway with a broken collarbone. If you come in here swinging, if you give him any excuse to call this an assault, a threat, anything, he walks. His lawyer paints Lily as an unreliable witness with a hostile father. And every one of those other victims stays buried. You want him gone? We do this clean. Daniel's jaw worked, grinding down against everything he wanted to do the moment he laid eyes on Victor Haynes. Fine, he said, the word coming out through clenched teeth. Clean, but Jack the Second, there's a legal way to put my hands on that man. I'm taking it. Understood. How many of you are there now? There was a brief silence on the line, and when Jack spoke again, there was something almost like a smile in his voice, grim and satisfied. More than you believe. Just keep driving, Daniel. We'll be ready when you get here. The call ended, and Daniel pressed his foot harder against the gas pedal, watching the mile markers blur past, counting down the distance between himself and the daughter he had failed to protect for 7 long months. Inside the diner, the parking lot had transformed into something Victor Haynes was only beginning to register as unusual. He stood at the kitchen window, a mug of black coffee, cooling forgotten, in his hand, watching motorcycle after motorcycle pull into his lot with a slow, steady rhythm that felt less like coincidence and more like something organized. 5, then 8, then 12. He set the mug down. Marcus, he called toward the back office where his assistant manager, a thin, nervous man named Ray, was doing inventory. Come here a second. Ray shuffled into view, clipboard in hand. Yeah, boss. You seeing this? Victor gestured toward the window, toward the growing line of leather-vested men gathering in small clusters across the lot, talking quietly among themselves, none of them coming inside, none of them ordering food. Ray's eyes widened slightly. That's a lot of bikes. You think I don't know that Ray, Victor's voice had an edge to it now, sharp enough that Ray took an instinctive step back. I'm asking why they're here. We don't get rallies out this way, not on a Thursday. Maybe it's nothing, boss. Maybe they're just, it's not nothing. Victor's eyes drifted back toward the dining room, toward the corner booth where the original four men still sat unmoving, watching the room with a patience that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Something's happening here, and I don't like not knowing what it is. He thought again of Lily's face in the back hallway 20 minutes earlier. The way she'd looked at him was something he hadn't seen from her in months. Not fear. Something closer to defiance. Something closer to hope. His stomach tightened. Get me the employee files, he said quietly. Lily's contract. I want to make sure everything's airtight before whatever this is gets any bigger. You think it's about her? I think, Victor said slowly, watching another motorcycle roll into the lot, that I've been doing this a long time, Ray, and I've learned that when something feels wrong, it usually is. Out in the dining room, Lily moved between tables with mechanical precision, refilling coffee, delivering plates, taking orders, all while her mind spun through possibilities she couldn't fully process. She'd caught glimpses of the parking lot through the front windows every time she passed, watched it fill with more motorcycles than she'd ever seen in one place. And though a part of her wanted to ask someone what was happening, a larger part of her understood instinctively that she wasn't supposed to draw attention to it. She approached the corner booth again, coffee pot in hand, and Jack looked up at her with an expression that was almost gentle. Everything all right, sweetheart? He asked, his voice pitched low enough that only their small circle could hear. I don't know, she admitted, refilling his cup with hands that had finally stopped shaking. There are so many of you now. What's happening? Your father's on his way, Jack said simply. He asked us to look after you until he gets here. Her breath caught. My father's coming here. Should be about 10 more minutes if the roads stay clear. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them, and she blinked hard, glancing quickly toward the kitchen to make sure Victor wasn't watching. I haven't seen him in almost 8 months. We talk on the phone sometimes, but I've been so busy, and he's so far up the mountain, and I never wanted him to worry. He's been worrying, Jack said quietly, more than you know, and he's about to make up for a lot of lost time, I promise you that. She wiped her eyes quickly, forcing herself back into composure before Victor could notice anything amiss, and moved on to the next table. Though her heart felt lighter than it had in months, buoyed by a hope she was almost afraid to trust. Behind the counter, an older waitress named Donna sidled up beside her, glancing nervously toward the growing crowd outside. Lily, honey, what in the world is going on? I've worked here 6 years, and I've never seen anything like this. I don't know, Donna, Lily said, and for once, it wasn't entirely a lie. You seem different today, Donna said, studying her with narrowed, knowing eyes. Something's happening with you. Lily managed a small, genuine smile, the first one Donna had seen from her in weeks. Maybe something good for once. 26 minutes after Jack's call, Daniel Carter's truck tore into the parking lot of the diner, gravel spraying from beneath his tires as he braked hard, and he was out of the vehicle before it had fully stopped rocking on its suspension. He stood there for a moment, chest heaving, staring at the sight in front of him. The lot was full. Dozens of motorcycles, more than he could count at a glance, arranged in loose formations across every available space, with men standing beside them in small, quiet clusters, all of them turning to look at him as he emerged from his truck. Jack was already walking toward him, having stepped outside the moment he'd spotted the familiar truck barreling down the highway exit. The two men stopped a few feet apart, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. 19 years collapsed into that single silent moment. Jack, Daniel finally said, his voice thick. Daniel. Jack's eyes were wet, and he didn't bother hiding it. God, it's been too long. I know. Daniel's jaw worked, fighting down emotion that threatened to overwhelm him entirely. I know it has, and I'm sorry. I should have called. I should have. Not now, Jack said, gently stepping forward and pulling Daniel into a rough, brief embrace. The kind two proud men allow themselves only in moments of true crisis. We'll talk about all of that. We will, but right now your daughter is inside that building and she needs to see your face. Daniel nodded, swallowing hard, and looked past Jack toward the diner's front windows, where he could just make out a slim blonde figure moving between the tables. Is she all right? He asked. Really all right. She's scared, Jack said honestly, and she's thin and she flinches when her boss raises his voice, and everything about the way she moves tells me she's been walking on eggshells for a long time. But she's alive and she's safe, and in about 30 seconds, she's going to see you standing in that doorway. Daniel's hands were shaking as he walked toward the entrance, Jack falling into step slightly behind him, flanked now by Cole and two other members who'd quietly positioned themselves near the door without being asked. The bell above the diner door chimed as Daniel pushed it open, and for a moment the ordinary sounds of the diner continued uninterrupted. The clatter of dishes, the low murmur of conversation, the sizzle of the grill from the kitchen. And then Lily looked up from the table she was serving, coffee pot still in hand, and her entire body went rigid. "Dad?" The word came out as barely a whisper, but it carried across the entire dining room like a shout. The coffee pot slipped from her fingers, and Cole, who had moved silently to stand near the counter, caught it before it hit the ground, setting it aside without a word, his eyes never leaving the reunion unfolding in front of him. Lily crossed the diner in seconds, and Daniel met her halfway, his arms opening just in time to catch her as she collided into him, sobbing into his chest, with 7 months of exhaustion and fear and desperate unspoken hope finally breaking loose all at once. "Dad, I'm sorry. I should have told you. I should have called. I didn't want you to worry. I thought I could handle it. I thought..." "Shh." Daniel's voice broke as he held her, one hand cradling the back of her head, the way he had when she was small, when nightmares used to send her running into his room in the middle of the night. "You don't apologize to me. You hear me. You don't ever apologize for this. I'm the one who should have come sooner. I'm the one who let too much time pass." "You remembered," she said into his chest, still crying. "The words. I said the words, and they came, Dad. They actually came." "Of course they came," Daniel murmured, tears finally slipping down his own weathered face. "I told you they would. I promised you they would." From the kitchen doorway, Victor Haynes watched this reunion with a growing cold dread settling into his stomach. He'd seen enough over the years to recognize the shape of trouble when it walked through his front door, and this, a father, a crowd of bikers, tears, an emotional collapse in the middle of his dining room. This was trouble on a scale he hadn't anticipated. He straightened his shoulders, forced his expression into something professional, and walked out from behind the kitchen window. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet dining room. "This is a place of business. I'm going to need everyone to either order something or clear out." Every head in the diner turned toward him. Daniel released his daughter slowly, keeping one protective arm around her shoulders, and turned to face the man for the first time. "You're Victor Haynes," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. "I am. And you are Daniel Carter, Lily's father." Something flickered across Victor's face, quickly suppressed, but not quickly enough that Jack, standing a few feet behind Daniel, missed it entirely. Recognition, calculation, the rapid mental math of a man assessing a new and unwelcome variable. "Mr. Carter," Victor said, his voice smooth, professional, dangerously calm, "your daughter is a valued employee here. I'm not sure what's prompted this gathering, but I'd appreciate it if we could discuss any concerns privately in my office, rather than disrupting the other customers." "I don't think so," Daniel said, his voice low and hard. "I think we're going to discuss this right here, right now, in front of everyone. Mr. Carter, I understand emotions are running high, but..." "Emotions are running high," Daniel repeated, his voice climbing slightly. "Because my daughter has spent the last 7 months trapped in a job she couldn't leave, working off some fabricated debt you invented to keep her here isolated from her family, scared to make a phone call. Does that sound about right, Victor?" The dining room had gone completely silent now. Every customer, every trucker, every waitress, frozen in place, watching the confrontation unfold with the kind of stunned attention usually reserved for car accidents. "That's a serious accusation," Victor said, his composure cracking slightly at the edges. "One I'd be happy to discuss calmly in private if you'd..." "I'm not interested in private," Daniel said. "I'm interested in the truth, and I think everyone in this room deserves to hear it." "Dad," Lily whispered, gripping his arm. "Please don't. He'll what?" Daniel turned to her, his expression softening instantly, even as fury still simmered beneath the surface. "He'll fire you. Sweetheart, you're never setting foot back behind that counter again." I promise you that. Victor's eyes narrowed, the mask of professionalism slipping further. Mr. Carter, I'd advise you to be very careful about the accusations you're throwing around in front of witnesses. I have signed contracts. I have documentation. Your daughter agreed to the terms of her employment of her own free will. Documentation you drafted that she signed without a lawyer present that included fees she was never told about up front. Daniel shot back. That's called predatory contracting, Victor, and it's illegal in this state, and I'd bet my truck outside that you know it. For the first time since walking into the room, Victor's eyes flickered with something like genuine alarm. He glanced past Daniel toward the dozens of bikers now visible through the front windows, toward the four men who had positioned themselves strategically around the dining room, and he understood with sudden clarity that whatever this was, it was bigger than he'd initially assessed. I think we're done here, Victor said abruptly, turning to walk back toward the kitchen. Lily, if you'd like to quit, that's your prerogative, but you'll be doing so in breach of contract, and I will be pursuing the balance owed, $12,000. You won't be pursuing anything, Jack said, stepping forward for the first time, his voice carrying an authority that stopped Victor mid-stride. Because by the time this is done, Mr. Haynes, you're going to be far too busy explaining 11 other labor complaints filed against you over the last 6 years to worry about collecting a debt that was never legally binding in the first place. Victor froze. The color drained slowly from his face as he turned back around, his eyes moving from Jack to Daniel to the growing crowd visible outside, and for the first time, Lily saw something she had never seen in her employer's face before. Fear. I don't know what you're talking about, Victor said, but his voice had lost its earlier smoothness, replaced by something brittle and defensive. Sure you do, Jack said calmly. 11 complaints, all withdrawn or dismissed, all of them following a pattern that's going to look real interesting to a state labor investigator once we hand over what we found. You have no authority to investigate anything, Victor snapped, some of his earlier arrogance flooding back. You're bikers, not lawyers, not police, not anyone with any legal standing to make accusations. You're right, Jack said easily. We're not lawyers or police, but we know some, and we've spent the last 30 minutes making phone calls, Victor, while you were busy hiding in your kitchen, wondering why your parking lot was filling up. Labor board's already been notified, attorney's on her way, and I'd bet good money that once word gets out about what's happening here today, a few of those 11 former employees who withdrew their complaints might find themselves feeling a little braver. Victor's jaw tightened, his eyes darting rapidly between Jack Daniel and the small crowd of customers and staff who had gathered near the counter, watching the confrontation with wide, stunned eyes. This is harassment, Victor said, his voice rising now, cracking at the edges with barely controlled panic. I want all of you off my property. Now. Your property, Daniel repeated, stepping forward until he was only a few feet from Victor, close enough that Lily instinctively grabbed his sleeve, worried he might do something he couldn't take back. You mean the property you've been running an illegal labor scheme out of for 6 years? Get out, Victor said, his composure fully gone, now spit flying slightly with the force of his words. Get out of my diner, all of you, before I call the sheriff. Please do, Jack said, utterly unbothered, crossing his arms across his chest. Call them. We've got nothing to hide, and I'd love to introduce them to your employee files. Victor's face had gone the color of ash. He looked around the dining room at the frozen customers, at his own staff, staring at him with expressions he'd never seen before, expressions of dawning understanding, and something in his eyes shifted, some final calculation, completing itself. He turned and walked quickly toward the back office, his footsteps rapid, almost a jog. He's going for the files, Cole said sharply, already moving to follow. Let him, Jack said, holding up a hand. If he tries to destroy anything, that's obstruction, and it only makes this worse for him. But keep an eye on the back exit. I don't want him disappearing out the back before the authorities get here. Cole nodded and moved toward the rear of the building, positioning himself near the hallway that led to the office. In the back door, arms crossed, an immovable wall of leather and muscle that made it clear Victor Haynes wasn't going anywhere unnoticed. Daniel turned back to his daughter, cupping her face gently in both hands, studying her with an intensity that made fresh tears well in her eyes. You're too thin, he said quietly, his thumb brushing gently across her cheekbone. How long has it been like this? Really? Since the beginning, she admitted, her voice small. The first month, he started talking about fees I didn't remember agreeing to. Training costs, equipment deposits. Every paycheck got smaller, and every time I asked about it, he had some explanation ready, some document with my signature on it that I didn't remember signing or that I'd signed without reading closely enough. And when I tried to leave back in April, he threatened me with the debt. $12,000, Dad. I didn't have $12,000. I didn't have anywhere to go. No lawyer, no money for one. And I was so scared, and I didn't want you to worry because you'd already lost so much, and I didn't want to be one more thing. Stop. Daniel's voice cracked, and he pulled her into another fierce hug, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heart hammering against her cheek. You are never one more thing, Lily. You are the thing. You're the only thing that's mattered to me since your mother died, and I have spent 19 years hiding on that mountain, telling myself I was protecting my grief when really I was just protecting myself from feeling anything at all. And I let that cost me you. It almost cost me you, and I am never ever going to let that happen again. Around them, the dining room remained frozen in stunned silence. Customers and staff alike watching a family's private anguish unfold in painfully public view, none of them quite able to look away. Donna, the older waitress, wiped tears from her own eyes as she watched, murmuring quietly to another server beside her. I always knew something was wrong with that girl. I just never knew how to ask. None of us did, the other server whispered back. He made sure of that. From the back hallway, muffled sounds began drifting out, the scrape of a filing cabinet, the rustle of papers, and Cole's voice low and warning. Mr. Haynes, I wouldn't do that if I were you. A moment later, Victor's voice sharp with panic. This is my private office. Get away from that door. Not private anymore, Cole said calmly. Not once state investigators start asking about it. Jack glanced toward the hallway, then back at Daniel and Lily, his expression softening as he watched the two of them, father and daughter, finally truly reunited after so many months and years of quiet separation. Daniel, he said gently, I think it's time you took your daughter outside. Let her breathe some fresh air away from all this. We've got things handled in here. Daniel nodded, still holding Lily close, and began guiding her toward the front door, though she paused halfway there, looking back at Jack with an expression of overwhelming gratitude. Thank you, she said softly. I don't even know how to thank you enough. You didn't even know me. You just came. Jack's expression turned tender, decades of hardened biker exterior, softening into something almost paternal. 20 years ago, your father pulled me off a burning highway when he had no reason to risk his own life to do it. Family doesn't need a reason, sweetheart. Family just shows up. Tears spilled fresh down Lily's cheeks as she nodded, and Daniel guided her the rest of the way outside into the parking lot filled with dozens of motorcycles and the quiet, watchful men who had answered a call for help without hesitation. The moment they stepped outside, the sheer scale of what had gathered hit Lily all at once. Motorcycles stretched across the entire lot, more than 50 of them now, and men stood in small clusters everywhere, all of them turning to watch, as Daniel led his daughter out into the morning sunlight. One older man, silver-haired with a weathered face and kind eyes, stepped forward and extended a hand toward Daniel. Daniel Carter, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Been a long time, brother. Daniel's eyes widened with recognition. Pete, my God, Pete Hendricks, is that you? In the flesh. Pete pulled Daniel into a brief, firm embrace. We heard what happened. Heard your girl needed help. Wasn't a man here who was going to sit that one out. Daniel looked around at the gathered crowd, overwhelmed, his throat too tight to speak for a long moment. I don't understand, he finally managed. I haven't ridden with any of you in almost 20 years. I disappeared. I stopped answering calls. I let all of this go and you all still came. Pete's expression turned serious, gentle. Daniel, you think brotherhood has an expiration date? You think because you needed space to grieve, we forgot everything you did for this family before that? You pulled Grizzly off a burning highway with your bare hands. You've got nothing but love waiting for you here whenever you're ready to come back to it. Daniel's composure finally broke entirely, and he pressed a hand over his mouth, nodding rapidly, unable to speak past the emotion clogging his throat. Lily watched her father's tears with a strange, aching tenderness, understanding for the first time the true scope of what he had lost and given up during all those isolated years on the mountain. She had always known her father was quiet, private, carrying some deep, unspoken grief. She had never fully understood just how much family he had walked away from in the process. Dad, she said softly, squeezing his hand, maybe it's time to stop hiding. He looked down at her, eyes wet, and managed a small, broken laugh. Maybe it is. Back inside the diner, the confrontation in the back hallway had escalated. Cole stood firmly in the doorway of Victor's office, blocking his exit, while Victor stood behind his desk, a stack of papers clutched in trembling hands. "You have no right to keep me from my own office," Victor snapped. "I'm not keeping you from anything," Cole said calmly. "You're free to go anywhere you want, Mr. Haynes. I'm just making sure whatever's in those hands doesn't end up in a shredder before the labor board arrives. This is my private business documentation. That may end up being evidence," Cole finished for him, "which means it stays right where it is." Victor's eyes darted around the small office, searching for some exit, some option, and finding none. He was trapped, cornered by his own choices, by 6 years of exploitation finally catching up to him all at once in the space of a single Thursday morning. "You people have no idea what you're doing," he said, his voice shaking, now fear finally breaking through the last of his composure. "I have lawyers, You have 11 complaints and a pattern of witness intimidation that's about to become very interesting to a lot of people," Jack said, appearing in the doorway behind Cole, his expression cold and unyielding. "And you have about 10 more minutes before the state investigator my associate contacted arrives to start asking questions. I'd use that time wisely if I were you, Mr. Haynes. Maybe call that lawyer. Maybe start thinking real hard about cooperation, because right now, that's the only card you've got left to play." Victor sank slowly into his desk chair, the papers slipping from his hands and scattering across the floor, his face ashen. His earlier arrogance completely gone, replaced by the hollow, panicked expression of a man watching his entire carefully constructed world collapse in real time. Outside in the parking lot, a car pulled in behind the sea of motorcycles. A plain gray sedan with government plates and a woman in a tailored blazer stepped out, scanning the scene with sharp, assessing eyes before making her way toward the diner entrance. Jack spotted her through the window and felt something settle in his chest, a grim satisfaction that the machinery he'd set into motion just over an hour ago was finally fully in gear. "That's Reyes," he murmured to Cole. "State labor investigator. Things are about to get very official for our friend Victor." But even as he said it, even as the morning's crisis seemed to be moving towards some measure of resolution, Jack's phone buzzed once more in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, saw Marcus's name, and answered quickly. "Tell me you've got good news," Jack said. "I've got news," Marcus said grimly. "Not sure how good it is. I dug deeper into those LLC's grisly, and it's bigger than we thought. A lot bigger. Haynes isn't just running this one diner as a trap. There's at least 2 other locations, one in Grand Junction, one out near Pueblo, both under different business names, both showing the exact same complaint pattern." Jack's stomach tightened. "How many people, Marcus?" "I don't know yet, but if this same scheme's been running across 3 locations for 6 years, Marcus's voice trailed off, leaving the implication hanging heavy in the silence. "Could be dozens," Jack said quietly. "Could be more." "Could be a lot more," Marcus confirmed. Jack looked back through the office doorway at Victor Haynes, sitting slumped and defeated behind his desk, and understood with sudden clarity that whatever they had uncovered this morning was only the surface of something far larger, far darker than a single diner and a single trapped waitress. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Agent Diane Reyes walked through the diner's front door with the calm, unhurried authority of a woman who had spent 15 years untangling exactly this kind of nightmare. And the first thing she did was not look at Victor Haynes at all. She looked at Lily. "You're the daughter," she said, not a question. "Lily Carter." "Yes, ma'am. I need you to know something before we go any further." Reyes's voice was steady, warm, in a way that surprised Lily given the sharpness in her eyes a moment before. "None of what happens today is your fault. Not the contract, not the debt, not any of it. I've seen this pattern before, and I want you to hear me say that clearly, right at the start, because a lot of people in your position spend years blaming themselves for something that was never theirs to carry." Lily's chin trembled, and Daniel's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Thank you," Lily whispered. Reyes nodded once, then turned her attention toward the back hallway where Cole still stood like a wall in the doorway of Victor's office. "Mr. Haynes, is it? I understand you'd like to speak with your lawyer. That's your right, but I also have a warrant faxed and signed within the last 20 minutes authorizing a review of your employment records, payroll ledgers, and any contracts executed at this location within the last 3 years. I'd appreciate your cooperation." Victor's face, still ashen from the confrontation minutes earlier, twisted into something between panic and calculation. A warrant based on what evidence? Some biker's phone calls. Based on 11 prior complaints filed with this office, Reyes said flatly, 7 of which I personally reviewed within the last hour, and all 7 of which show identical withdrawal patterns filed, then quietly retracted within 2 to 3 weeks, always citing, and I quote, employee reconsideration. That's not a coincidence, Mr. Haynes. That's a pattern. And patterns are exactly what warrants are built on. Jack watched from a few feet away, arms crossed, a grim satisfaction settling into his chest as he saw the color drain further from Victor's face. 20 years of guilt, an hour of chaos, and now finally the machinery of real consequence beginning to turn. I want to see that warrant, Victor said, but his voice had lost its earlier bite. Of course. Reyes produced the document without hesitation, handing it across the desk, and Victor's hands shook slightly as he scanned it, searching. Jack suspected for some technicality, some loophole, anything that might let him claw back the control that had been slipping through his fingers since the moment Lily whispered 6 words to a stranger over the coffee. He found nothing. Jack could see it in his face the exact moment hope drained out of him entirely. This is going to ruin me, Victor said quietly, almost to himself. That should have occurred to you 6 years ago, Reyes replied without a trace of sympathy. Outside, the parking lot had settled into a strange, watchful calm. More than 60 motorcycles now filled the space, and the men who rode them stood in loose clusters, talking quietly, some helping direct the handful of confused customers who'd wandered out mid-meal, unsure whether to finish their food or flee the strange scene unfolding around them. A few truckers had simply abandoned their breakfast, entirely climbing back into their rigs and pulling out onto the interstate, eager to put distance between themselves and whatever storm was gathering. Donna, the older waitress, stood near the counter, wringing a dish towel in her hands, watching Reyes disappear into the back office with an expression caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. 6 years, she murmured to no one in particular. 6 years I worked for that man and never once let myself really look at what was happening. Lily, still wrapped in her father's arm, turned toward her. Donna, you didn't do anything wrong. None of us did. I should have asked more questions, Donna said, her voice thick. I saw girls come and go, young ones mostly. They'd start bright-eyed, and within a few months, they'd get quiet, thin, scared. I told myself it was just hard work. I told myself a lot of things. We all did, Lily said softly. That's what he counted on. Jack, listening nearby, felt his phone buzz again. Marcus. Tell me, Jack said, stepping a few feet away for privacy. Grizzly, I've got the Grand Junction location pulled up now. Owner of record is an LLC called Sunrise Hospitality Group. Guess who's listed as the registered agent? Haynes. Haynes, Marcus confirmed. Same story. 6 labor complaints in 4 years, 5 of them withdrawn within weeks. And Pueblo's even worse. 9 complaints, 8 withdrawn, and 1 that just stopped. No withdrawal filed, no resolution, noted the complainant just vanishes from the record entirely. Name was Marisol Vega, filed a wage theft complaint 2 years ago, then nothing. No further contact, no forwarding address, nothing. Jack's blood went cold. You're telling me a woman filed a complaint against this guy and then just disappeared from the system? I'm telling you the paper trail goes cold, Marcus said carefully. Could mean she just moved and didn't update anything. People do that, but given everything else we're finding, Grizzly, I don't love the coincidence. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of what they might actually be uncovering, pressing down harder with every new piece of information. This had started as a favor to an old friend. It was rapidly becoming something else entirely. Send it everything to Reyes, Jack said. Everything right now. And Marcus, see if you can find any current address for this Marisol Vega. If she's out there, I want someone to check on her. Already on it. Jack ended the call and turned back toward the diner where Reyes had emerged from the back office, carrying a thick folder of documents, her expression grim. Mr. Donovan, she said, spotting him. A word? He walked over and she lowered her voice, glancing back toward the office where Victor sat now, flanked by Cole and a second club member waiting with visible dread for his attorney to arrive. These ledgers are worse than the complaints suggested, Reyes said quietly. I'm seeing wage deductions that don't correspond to any legitimate expense going back years. Equipment fees for equipment that was never purchased. Training costs charged multiple times to the same employees. And there's something else. She hesitated. There are payments here, cash withdrawals made out to no one, no memo. Nothing totaling almost $40,000 over the last 18 months alone. What do you think that's for? I think Reyes said carefully that we might be looking at something bigger than wage theft. I've seen this pattern before in a case out of New Mexico a few years back. Employers who use debt and isolation to control workers sometimes escalate. Trafficking indicators. I'm not saying that's what this is. I'm saying I can't rule it out, and that changes everything about how carefully we need to move. Jack felt something twist sharply in his gut. Trafficking. I need to bring in federal partners, Reyes said. This is bigger than a state labor case now. I want your men to stay, keep this location secure, keep Haynes from destroying anything else, but I need to make some calls. Whatever you need. Reyes nodded and stepped away. Phone already pressed to her ear, and Jack stood there for a long moment staring at the back office where Victor Haynes sat with his head in his hands and felt something cold settle over him. This wasn't just about Lily anymore. It never had been, not really. It was about however many young women had walked through doors just like this one over years across 3 different towns and never made it back out again. He looked over at Daniel and Lily standing close together near the counter. Father and daughter finally reunited, and he made a decision. Daniel, he said, walking over, I need to talk to you, both of you. Daniel's face tightened at Jack's tone. What's wrong? Nothing more's wrong with Lily, Jack said quickly, seeing the fear flash across both their faces. She's safe, that's not what this is. But this investigation just got a lot bigger than one diner, Daniel. Reyes thinks Haynes might be connected to something worse than wage theft across all 3 of his locations. She's bringing in federal partners. Lily's face went pale. Worse how? Jack hesitated, weighing how much to say, then decided she deserved the truth. There's a woman, filed a complaint against him 2 years ago, then disappeared from every record they can find. Reyes wants to find out what happened to her. Lily's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, you think he... We don't know anything yet, Jack said firmly. I don't want you jumping to conclusions that might not be true, but I want you to understand why this is going to take longer than just walking away today. If there are other victims out there, Lily, your willingness to come forward to testify about what happened to you could be the thing that finally gets justice for all of them. Lily was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this, her hand still pressed to her mouth. When she finally lowered it, her expression had changed, fear, giving way to something harder, more resolute. I'll testify, she said, whatever they need. If there are other girls out there who went through what I went through, or worse, I want to help stop it. Daniel looked at his daughter with an expression of fierce, aching pride. That's my girl. There's something else, Jack said, glancing back toward the office. Reyes found unexplained cash withdrawals. $40,000 over 18 months, no documentation for what it was spent on. I don't know what that means yet, but I don't like it. Before anyone could respond, a commotion erupted from the back hallway. Victor's voice, suddenly loud, panicked, cutting through the diner's tense quiet. You can't hold me here. I haven't been charged with anything. Cole's voice calm, but firm. Nobody said you're under arrest, Mr. Haynes, but you're not leaving this building until Agent Reyes says you can. Sit back down. This is illegal detention. Reyes appeared in the hallway, phone still in hand, her expression sharp. Mr. Haynes, you're free to leave the moment I complete my initial review, which will be considerably faster if you stop trying to access your filing cabinet every time my back is turned. I noticed that, by the way. That's the 2nd time. Victor's face went red with fury and fear in equal measure. I want my lawyer. Your lawyer's been notified, according to your own assistant, Reyes said. He's 20 minutes out. I'd suggest you use the time productively by staying exactly where you are. Jack watched this exchange with grim satisfaction, then turned his attention back to something that had been nagging at him since Marcus's call. Marisol Vega, a woman who'd filed a complaint and vanished. He pulled out his phone and dialed a different number this time. Sanchez, he said when the call connected. It's Grizzly. I need a favor and I need it fast. For you, Grizzly, always. What's going on? I need you to check on a woman named Marisol Vega, last known connected to a business in Pueblo about 2 years back. Filed a labor complaint, then went dark. No forwarding address, nothing. I need to know if she's okay. Pueblo chapter's got people who know that area well. Give me an hour. Make it 30 minutes if you can. I'll do what I can, brother. Jack ended the call and turned to find Daniel watching him with an unreadable expression. You've built quite a network, Daniel said quietly, in the years since I disappeared. We never stopped being what we were, Daniel, Jack said. We just kept growing, kept helping people who needed it. I always hoped somewhere in the back of my mind that one day you'd come back and see it. Daniel's throat worked emotion clearly threatening to overwhelm him again. I should have come back years ago. I told myself grief was a private thing, that I needed to handle it alone, and I let that excuse cost me everything: my brothers, my community, almost my own daughter's safety. I don't know how to make up for that kind of time, Jack. You start, Jack said simply, by not disappearing again. That's the only way any of us make up for lost time. One day at a time, showing up. Lily, listening to this exchange, reached over and squeezed her father's hand, and Daniel looked down at her with an expression of such raw love that Jack had to look away for a moment, giving them privacy in the middle of a room that had none to offer. 40 minutes later, a black sedan pulled into the already crowded lot, and a man in an expensive suit stepped out, briefcase in hand, moving with the brisk, irritated energy of someone who resented being pulled away from whatever he'd been doing that morning. He pushed through the diner's front door, scanned the room quickly, and made a beeline for the back office. Victor Haynes, the man said, extending a hand that Victor shook with visible relief. Marcus Whitfield, I've represented you before on the Grand Junction matter. Jack's ears perked up at that. Grand Junction matter. Confirmation delivered casually that the connection between Victor's businesses wasn't just something Marcus had dug up through property records. It was something Victor's own lawyer knew about. Rhea, standing nearby reviewing documents, glanced up sharply, clearly having caught the same detail. She said nothing, but Jack saw her make a small notation in the margin of the folder she carried. Agent Reyes, Whitfield said, turning to her with a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. I understand you're conducting some kind of review here. I'd like to understand the scope of that before my client answers any further questions. Of course, Reyes said evenly. I'm reviewing employment records under a properly executed warrant related to labor complaints filed against this location, and I've just been informed by my office that federal partners are now reviewing related complaints from 2 additional locations owned by your client, Grand Junction and Pueblo. Whitfield's smile faltered slightly. Federal partners. That's right. On what basis? On the basis of a consistent multi-location pattern of wage theft, predatory contracting, and at least one complainant who filed a report and then disappeared from all available records, Reyes said, watching Whitfield's face carefully as she spoke. I understand you represented your client on, quote, the Grand Junction matter. I'd be very interested to know more about what that matter entailed, counselor. Whitfield's composure cracked just slightly, just for a moment, but Jack caught it, and so did Reyes. That's privileged information, Whitfield said quickly. Some of it might be, Reyes agreed, and some of it might not be once a grand jury starts asking questions. I'd advise you to think carefully about how deep you want to be standing in this, Mr. Whitfield, before this goes any further. The lawyer's jaw tightened, and for the first time since walking in, he looked genuinely rattled. He turned back to Victor, lowering his voice, though not quite low enough that Jack, standing a few feet away, couldn't catch fragments of the conversation. Need to talk privately. Anything you've told me before this doesn't cover. Victor's face, already pale, went whiter still. Jack's phone buzzed. Sanchez. Grizzly, Sanchez said, and something in his tone made Jack's stomach drop before he even heard the words. We found her. Marisol Vega. Is she all right? There was a pause, heavy and grim. She's alive. Barely, but alive. We found her working under a different name at a motel out on the edge of Pueblo, terrified out of her mind. Took some convincing before she'd even talk to us. But Grizzly, she says Haynes threatened her family back in Mexico if she didn't withdraw her complaint. Said he had, quote, people who could make problems for them unearth them. She's been hiding under a fake name for 2 years because she was scared he'd follow through. Jack closed his eyes, feeling the full sickening weight of what they'd uncovered settle over him. Get her somewhere safe, he said, and Sanchez, get this to Reyes immediately. This just became a lot more serious than wage theft. Already sending it. Jack ended the call and walked straight toward Reyes, who looked up from her documents with an expression that told him she could see immediately that something significant had happened. Marisol Vega's alive. Jack said quietly, pulling her a few steps away from the office from Whitfield's sharp ears. Hiding under a false name in Pueblo, she says Haynes threatened her family back in Mexico to force her to withdraw her complaint. Reyes' expression hardened into something Jack hadn't seen from her yet, cold and focused and utterly without mercy. Witness intimidation with an international threat component. That's not state jurisdiction anymore, Mr. Donovan. That's federal, and it's serious. She pulled out her phone immediately. I need to make some calls. This changes everything. She walked a short distance away, phone already pressed to her ear, and Jack turned back toward the dining room where Daniel and Lily still stood together, watching everything unfold with a mixture of relief and dawning horror. What's happening? Daniel asked as Jack approached. Jack hesitated, glancing at Lily, unsure how much more she could absorb this morning. But she straightened, meeting his eyes with a steadiness that surprised him. Tell me, she said. Whatever it is, I want to know. Jack nodded slowly. They found another woman. One who filed a complaint 2 years ago and then disappeared. She's alive, but she's been hiding under a fake name because Haynes threatened her family. Lily's hand flew to her mouth again, horror washing over her face. He threatened her family because she tried to report him. That's what she told the men who found her, yes. Lily's eyes filled with tears, but her jaw set with a fierce, determined anger that reminded Jack sharply of her father. How many more, Jack? How many more women has he done this to? I don't know, Jack admitted, but we're going to find out. Every one of them. Behind them in the back office, the conversation between Victor and his attorney had grown tense enough that Ray's voices carried into the dining room. I'm not going down alone for this. Victor's voice cracked through the walls. You knew about Grand Junction. You knew about the arrangements. Victor, stop talking, Whitfield hissed, but it was too late. Rhea, still on her phone a few feet away, turned sharply toward the office, her expression flat and satisfied. I need agents here within the hour, she said into the phone loud enough now that Jack suspected she wanted Victor to hear every word. We've got a possible trafficking and witness intimidation situation spanning 3 locations, and I think Mr. Haynes just implicated his own attorney in obstruction. A sharp silence fell over the back office. I didn't say anything, Victor said quickly, his voice climbing with panic. I didn't mean, you said quite a lot, actually. Reyes called back, not even bothering to hide her satisfaction now. And there are at least 6 witnesses in this dining room who heard you say it. Jack looked at Daniel, and something passed between the 2 old friends, a shared understanding of just how far this had come from a simple diner confrontation an hour and a half earlier. What had started as a single terrified whisper over a coffee cup had unraveled into something far larger, far darker, and far more consequential than any of them could have anticipated when Lily first spoke those 6 words. Dad, Lily said quietly, leaning into her father's side, I need to sit down for a minute. Of course, sweetheart. Daniel guided her to a booth near the window, away from the chaos still unfolding around the back office, and sat beside her, one arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. I keep thinking about how close I came to just staying quiet, she said, staring at her hands. If those bikes hadn't pulled up this morning, if I hadn't remembered what you told me, I would have just kept working weird, kept telling myself it would get better eventually. And that woman Marisol, she'd still be hiding, terrified, and nobody would even know to look for her. But you did remember, Daniel said gently, and you did speak up. That's what matters now, Lily. Not what almost happened, what actually happened, because you were brave enough to say 6 words to a stranger. She looked up at him, her eyes still wet. You gave me those words, Dad, all those years ago. You knew somehow that I might need them someday. Daniel's expression turned distant for a moment, remembering. I didn't know it would be this. I just knew that the world could be cruel to a young woman on her own, and I wanted you to have a door somewhere that you could open if you ever needed it. I never imagined it would lead to something this big. Across the diner, Cole approached, his expression grim. Grizzly Reyes wants everyone who's willing to give statements to stick around a while longer. Federal agents are inbound, ET, by 40 minutes. Jack nodded. We're not going anywhere. He glanced back toward Daniel and Lily sitting together in the booth and felt something settle in his chest. Some old worn piece of guilt finally beginning to ease. 20 years of distance, and it had taken a crisis like this to bring them back together. He wasn't going to let that connection slip away again, not this time. His phone buzzed once more. Marcus. What now? Jack asked, bracing himself. Grizzly, you're not going to believe this. Marcus said, his voice tight with something that sounded almost like disbelief. I kept digging into those cash withdrawals Reyes flagged. $40,000, remember? Yeah. I traced part of it. Some of those withdrawals correspond to payments made to a private investigator, one with a history of, let's say, aggressive collection tactics. Guy's got 2 prior complaints himself for intimidation and 1 assault charge that got pled down. Haynes was paying this guy to track down and pressure former employees who tried to leave or complain. Jack's grip tightened on the phone. The same guy who might have threatened Marisol's family. Could be. I'm sending everything to Reyes now. But Grizzly, if this investigator's out there right now, and he finds out this operation's falling apart, there's no telling what he might do. Destroy evidence, warn other people involved, or worse. Jack looked around the crowded diner at Daniel and Lily in their booth at Reyes, conferring quietly on her phone at Victor Haynes, slumped and broken in his own office, and felt a fresh wave of urgency wash over him. Send it to Reyes now, Jack said. And Marcus, find out everything you can about this investigator. Name, address, vehicle, anything. If he's still out there working for Haynes, we need to know before he finds out what's happening here. On it. Jack ended the call and walked quickly toward Reyes, who looked up as he approached, already sensing from his expression that something new had surfaced. We might have a bigger problem, Jack said quietly. And as he relayed what Marcus had found, he watched Reyes's face shift from focused determination into something sharper, more urgent. A private investigator with a history of intimidation on retainer and possibly unaware his employer's operation just collapsed, Reyes repeated, already reaching for her phone again. If he's out there right now, pressuring some other victim who hasn't come forward yet, we need to find him before word gets back to him. What can we do? Reyes hesitated, studying Jack for a long moment, weighing something. Officially, nothing. This is now a federal matter, and I need to follow proper procedure, but unofficially. She glanced toward the crowded parking lot, toward the dozens of motorcycles and patient, watchful men waiting outside. You clearly have resources I don't have immediate access to, local knowledge, contacts across multiple towns. You want us to help find him. I'm not authorized to deputize you, Mr. Donovan, Reyes said carefully, but I am authorized to share a name and a description with concerned citizens who happen to be standing nearby when I mention it out loud. A faint, knowing look crossed her face. The investigator's name is Ronald Kessler, drives a dark green pickup, Colorado plates. Last known to be operating primarily out of Pueblo. Jack understood exactly what she was offering him and exactly what she wasn't officially authorizing. Understood, he said. Purely coincidental if anyone happens to notice a dark green pickup matching that description. Purely coincidental, Reyes agreed, the faintest hint of a smile touching her otherwise serious expression. Jack turned and walked quickly toward the door, already pulling out his phone to relay the information to Sanchez in Pueblo, his mind racing through the implications of what they'd uncovered in less than 2 hours. A single frightened waitress, a 6-word phrase remembered from childhood, and now an unraveling conspiracy spanning 3 towns, multiple victims, a corrupt investigator, and quite possibly threats that reached all the way to a family across an international border. Behind him in the diner, Lily watched him go, then turned to her father, her expression a complicated mixture of exhaustion, fear, and something that looked unmistakably like hope. Dad, she said quietly, I think we just found something a lot bigger than I ever imagined. Daniel pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, his eyes fixed on the chaos still unfolding around them, on the brotherhood he had abandoned for 19 years now, moving heaven and earth to protect his daughter, and however many other victims Victor Haynes had left in his wake. Whatever it is, Daniel said softly, we're going to see it through. All of us, together. Outside, the sound of motorcycle engines began to rise, a small contingent, breaking away from the main gathering, heading south toward Pueblo, with grim purpose, chasing down a name and a dark green pickup truck before it could disappear into the vastness of the Colorado landscape and take with it any hope of protecting whoever Ronald Kessler might be threatening next. The ride south toward Pueblo took the better part of an hour, and Jack spent most of it with his phone clipped to his handlebar, Sanchez's voice crackling through the connection every few minutes with updates that did nothing to settle the tight knot in his chest. Green pickups registered to a shell company, Sanchez reported. Same address as one of Haynes's LLCs. This guy's not some independent contractor Grizzly. He's baked into the whole operation. Any sign of him yet? Working on it. Pueblo chapter's got eyes on the motel where we found Marisol. If he shows up there, we'll know. Jack signed off and glanced sideways at Cole riding beside him. Both men pushing their bikes harder than usual, weaving through the light midday traffic with a controlled urgency, neither of them voiced out loud. Behind him, Lily sat wrapped tight against her father's back on Daniel's truck, following a few car lengths behind the small convoy because, after everything that had already happened, Daniel refused to let her out of his sight for even a mile. Back at the diner, the scene had transformed entirely. Federal agents had arrived 20 minutes earlier, 2 sedans and a van pulling into a lot still crowded with motorcycles, and the transition from state to federal jurisdiction had happened with the brisk, efficient coldness of professionals who had clearly done this before. Rhea stood at the center of it, coordinating her earlier grim satisfaction, replaced now by focused intensity as she briefed the lead federal agent, a compact, sharp-eyed woman named Agent Patricia Voss. Wire fraud wage theft across 3 locations. Witness intimidation with international threat elements. Voss said, scanning the documents Reyes handed her. And now a possible 4th victim in the wind and an investigator with a documented history of intimidation running loose. This is a lot for a Thursday morning. It gets worse, Reyes said. I flagged the cash withdrawals to your office an hour ago. $40,000, no documentation. If Kessler's been running elections and intimidation for 6 years across 3 towns, we're not looking at one bad actor. We're looking at a network. Voss's jaw tightened. Where's Haynes now? Still in the back office. His attorney's requesting he not answer further questions, but he's already said enough in front of witnesses to open a can of worms neither of them can close. Voss walked toward the back office with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd built a career out of exactly this moment, and Donna, watching from behind the counter, leaned toward another waitress and murmured, I've never seen anything like this in my whole life. Neither have I, the other woman whispered back, eyes wide. Inside the office, Victor Haynes sat hunched over his desk, his face gray, his hands trembling slightly, as Whitfield leaned close, whispering something urgent that Victor didn't seem to be absorbing at all. When Voss stepped into the doorway flashing federal credentials, Victor's head snapped up and something in his expression finally completely broke. I want to cooperate, he said suddenly, his voice cracking. Whitfield's head whipped toward him. Victor, don't. I want to cooperate, Victor repeated louder, but ignoring his lawyer entirely. I'll tell you everything. Kessler, the other locations, all of it. I need to know if cooperating helps me. Please, I have a daughter too. The words landed strangely in the room, and for a moment nobody spoke. Voss's expression didn't soften, not even slightly. Cooperation is always noted, Mr. Haynes, she said evenly. Whether it helps you depends entirely on how honest you are willing to be starting right now. Tell me about Ronald Kessler. Victor's confession poured out messily disjointed, punctuated by his lawyer's increasingly desperate attempts to stop him, that grew quieter and quieter until Whitfield finally sat back, resigned, watching his client dig himself deeper with every sentence. Kessler had been on retainer for 4 years, hired originally for collections, which Victor now admitted, voice shaking, sometimes meant more than phone calls. Sometimes meant visits to family members. Sometimes meant threats specific enough that the women receiving them had no doubt they were real. Did you know he threatened Marisol Vega's family in Mexico? Voss asked. Victor's silence stretched long enough that it answered the question on its own. I told him to make the complaint go away. Victor finally said, barely above a whisper. I didn't ask how. Voss's expression remained perfectly neutral, but Jack, had he been standing there instead of tearing down the highway toward Pueblo, would have recognized the particular stillness of someone filing away testimony that would matter enormously in a courtroom months from now. On the highway, Jack's phone buzzed against his handlebar mount, and he answered through his helmet's connected speaker. Sanchez's voice crackling through immediately. Grizzly, we've got him. Green pickup just pulled into a gas station off Highway 50, maybe 10 minutes from your position. Man matching Kessler's description is inside paying for gas right now. Don't approach him, Jack said sharply. Just watch. We're close. Copy that. Jack pushed his bike faster, and beside him, Cole matched the pace, both men reading the tension in each other's posture without needing words. Behind them, Daniel's truck kept pace as best it could, and through the rearview mirror, Daniel could see Lily's face pale and tense, watching the road ahead like she expected danger to materialize out of the asphalt itself. You okay back there? Daniel called back to her. I keep thinking about her. Lily said, her voice tight. Marisol, hiding for 2 years because she was scared for her family. What if we're too late for someone else? What if there's another woman out there right now and Kessler's about to... We're not too late, Daniel said with more confidence than he entirely felt. Jack and his men are going to make sure of that. 10 minutes later, the convoy pulled into the gas station lot, engines cutting off in a staggered rhythm, and Jack dismounted quickly, scanning the scene. The green pickup sat at the far pump empty, and through the station's front window, he could see a stocky man in a gray jacket standing at the counter, paying cash, utterly unaware that his morning was about to change dramatically. "Cole with me," Jack said quietly. "Everyone else stay by the bikes. Nobody crowds him. We just need to talk." They walked into the station together, and the man at the counter turned as the bell above the door chimed. His eyes flicking over the two large leather-clad figures with the practiced wariness of someone who'd made a career out of intimidating people and recognized instinctively when the tables had turned. "Ronald Kessler," Jack asked, his voice calm, deliberately non-threatening. The man's eyes narrowed. "Who's asking?" "Someone who just spent the morning talking to your employer," Jack said. "Victor Haynes." Ring a bell. Something shifted in Kessler's face, a flicker of calculation, and his hand moved slightly toward his jacket pocket before he seemed to think better of it, clearly registering the odds stacked against him in a small gas station with two enormous bikers blocking his exit and easily 30 more visible through the window outside. "I don't know what you're talking about," Kessler said. "Sure you do," Jack said. "Marisol Vega, ring a bell too." The clerk behind the counter, sensing the tension, quietly backed toward the far-end phone already in hand. Kessler's jaw tightened. "I have no idea who that is." "Funny," Jack said, "because she remembers you real well. Remembers what you told her about her family back home. That's a federal matter now, Ronald. Witness intimidation threats crossing an international border. FBI's already got Haynes in custody, and he's talking, a lot. Your name's come up more than once." The color drained from Kessler's face, and for a moment Jack watched him calculate his options. Watched the exact moment he realized there weren't any good ones left. "I want a lawyer," Kessler said. "Good idea," Jack said. "You're going to want one real bad in about 10 minutes because there's a federal agent named Voss who's going to be very interested in meeting you." He glanced toward Cole. "Call it in." Kessler's eyes darted toward the door, and Jack saw the calculation flicker through his face again, the desperate cornered animal instinct to run, despite the impossibility of the odds. Jack stepped subtly to block the exit more fully, his voice dropping into something harder. "Don't," he said simply. "You run, it just looks worse when they catch you. And they will catch you, Ronald. There's nowhere between here and Mexico that 30 motorcycles can't cover faster than that truck of yours." Kessler's shoulders slumped, the fight visibly draining out of him, and he sank back against the counter, defeated as sirens began wailing faintly in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. 20 minutes later, Kessler sat in the back of a state patrol car, having been detained pending the arrival of federal agents, and Jack stood outside the gas station with Sanchez, watching the whole surreal scene unfold with a strange, hollow satisfaction that didn't yet feel like relief. "We got him," Sanchez said. "We got him," Jack agreed. "But that's not the end of it. Marcus says there could be more people involved. More victims we haven't found yet." His phone buzzed. Reyes this time. "Mr. Donovan," she said here, her voice carrying a note of genuine appreciation he hadn't heard from her before. "I understand congratulations are in order regarding Mr. Kessler. Word travels fast. Agent Voss just informed me. And I wanted you to know Haynes is cooperating. Fully. He's given up locations, names, financial records for all three businesses. This is bigger than we initially realized, Mr. Donovan. We're looking at potentially a dozen victims across 3 counties going back 6 years." Jack closed his eyes, absorbing the scope of it. A dozen. At least. Some may have simply moved on and won't be hard to locate for follow-up. Others? Reyes paused. Others we're still trying to find. But because of what happened this morning, because your friend's daughter had the courage to speak up, we finally have the thread to pull all of this apart. "How's Lily?" Jack asked, glancing back toward Daniel's truck, where Lily sat with the door open, watching the scene at the gas station with a complicated mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. "Shaken, understandably," Reyes said. But she gave a preliminary statement to Agent Voss before you left the diner, and I have to tell you, Mr. Donovan, it was one of the clearest, most composed accounts I've heard in a case like this. That girl's got real strength in her. She gets it from her father, Jack said, watching Daniel walk toward Lily, wrapping an arm around her, murmuring something that made her lean into him gratefully. Speaking of which, Reyes continued, I need everyone who's willing to make formal statements to come by the field office over the next few days. This is going to be a lengthy process, prosecutions especially, but every piece of testimony matters. We'll be there, whatever you need. The call ended, and Jack walked toward Daniel's truck, feeling the weight of the morning finally beginning to settle into something more like exhaustion than adrenaline. Daniel looked up as he approached, his expression a mixture of gratitude and lingering shock. Is it over? Daniel asked quietly. Kessler's part of it, yes, Jack said. But Reyes says this goes deeper than we thought. A dozen victims, maybe more across 3 counties, 6 years. This is going to take a while to fully unravel. Lily, listening from inside the truck, spoke up, her voice steadier than it had been an hour earlier. Good, I want it fully unraveled. Every single person he hurt deserves to have this made right. Daniel looked down at his daughter with an expression Jack recognized instantly, the same fierce protective pride Jack himself felt toward every young rider who'd ever proven themselves worthy of the patch. She's something else, your girl, Jack said quietly to Daniel. She always has been, Daniel said. I just forgot to notice these last few years. Too busy grieving to see what was right in front of me. Well, Jack said, clasping a hand on his old friend's shoulder, you're noticing now. That's what matters. The days that followed blurred together into a strange, exhausting rhythm of formal statements, follow-up interviews, and a growing awareness spreading through news outlets across the state that something significant had unraveled outside a truck stop diner on Interstate 70. Reporters began calling first a local station out of Denver, then within a week, national outlets picking up the story of the young waitress whose 6 whispered words had triggered a federal investigation spanning 3 counties and uncovering a labor trafficking operation that had been running largely unnoticed for 6 years. Lily found herself overwhelmed by the attention, unsure how to process becoming, almost overnight, the face of a story far bigger than her own experience. She gave 2 more formal interviews to federal investigators, sat through hours of legal preparation with a victim's advocate assigned to her case, and slowly, painfully began to understand the true scope of what Victor Haynes and Ronald Kessler had built. 9 other victims came forward in the 2 weeks following the diner confrontation. Women who had read about Lily's story in the news and finally found the courage to speak up about their own experiences. Some had simply left Haynes's employment quietly years earlier, carrying their trauma privately, never realizing others had suffered the same pattern. Others, like Marisol, had been actively silenced, threatened, coerced into disappearing rather than pursuing justice. Marisol Vega herself, once federal protection was arranged for her and assurances made about her family's safety back in Mexico, reached out to Lily directly, and the 2 women met for coffee at a small cafe in Pueblo, an encounter Jack had quietly arranged security for, though neither woman ever knew it. I never thought anyone would believe me, Marisol admitted, her English careful, measured. I thought I would hide forever. You're safe now, Lily said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. Both of us are. Because of you, Marisol said. Because you spoke up. If you hadn't, I would still be hiding, still be scared every single day. Lily shook her head. I just said 6 words to a stranger. Everything after that, that was Jack and his brothers and Agent Reyes and everyone who actually did the work of tearing this whole thing apart. 6 words matter, Marisol said firmly. Sometimes 6 words is exactly what it takes to start everything else. Back at Daniel's mountain cabin, a different kind of healing was taking place, slower, quieter, but no less profound. Lily had moved in with her father almost immediately after that first chaotic day, unable to face returning to the tiny rented room she'd occupied near the diner, and Daniel had welcomed her without hesitation, clearing out the small guest room that had sat mostly unused for years, filling it with warmth and care in a way that made Lily's chest ache with gratitude every time she walked through the door. One evening, about 10 days after everything had first unfolded, Jack rode up the winding mountain road to Daniel's cabin, engine rumbling steadily through the quiet evening air, and found Daniel sitting on his porch, staring out at the darkening tree line with an expression Jack hadn't seen on his old friend's face in years. Something almost like peace. Figured I'd find you out here, Jack said, dismounting and climbing the porch steps. Been doing a lot of thinking, Daniel said, gesturing for Jack to take the seat beside him. About the last 19 years, about everything I let myself walk away from. Jack sat the two men falling into a comfortable silence for a long moment before Daniel spoke again. I've got something in the garage, Daniel said. Haven't touched it in almost 20 years. Been meaning to show you. He led Jack around back to a small, detached garage Jack hadn't noticed on his way in, and pulled open the door to reveal beneath a thick layer of dust and an old canvas tarp the unmistakable shape of a motorcycle. Jack's breath caught. Is that the bike I was riding the day you crashed? Daniel confirmed quietly. Never sold it. Never rode it again either, if I'm honest. Just let it sit here gathering dust, same as I let everything else gather dust these last 19 years. Jack stepped closer, running a hand reverently along the tarp before carefully pulling it back, revealing the machine beneath rust, creeping across chrome that had once gleamed tires long since flattened and cracked with age, but the frame, the bones of it, still recognizably beautiful beneath the neglect. Sarah used to tease me about this bike, Daniel said softly. Said I loved it more than I loved her some days. I always told her that wasn't true, but looking back now, I wonder if maybe the bike represented something. I needed some freedom. I was scared to admit I was giving up when we started a family. And then after she passed, I couldn't even look at it anymore. Every time I did, I thought about the person I used to be before grief hollowed me out. Jack studied his old friend's face in the fading evening light, seeing clearly now the years of isolation etched into every line, every gray hair that hadn't been there 2 decades earlier. You want to fix her up? Jack asked quietly. Daniel was silent for a long moment, staring at the neglected motorcycle, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight Jack hadn't heard from him since their reunion at the diner. I think I need to, Daniel said. Not just for the bike. For me. For Lily too, maybe. She's been living here almost 2 weeks now, and every evening I catch her looking at old photos of Sarah, of the three of us together back before everything went dark. I think she needs to see me become someone again. Not just her father hiding on a mountain. Someone with life still in him. Then let's fix her up, Jack said simply. I'll bring some of the boys up this weekend. We'll make a project of it. That weekend, 6 members of the Iron Wolves chapter arrived at Daniel's Cabin Tools and spare parts loaded into the beds of 2 pickup trucks. And what followed was a slow, methodical restoration that stretched across 3 consecutive weekends, filled with the kind of easy-working camaraderie Daniel had forgotten he'd once had, back before grief had convinced him he didn't deserve it anymore. Lily watched from the porch during those first few hours, initially hesitant, unsure of her place among these large, weathered men who spoke a language of engines and mechanics she didn't fully understand. But by the second weekend, Cole had handed her a wrench and shown her how to help with the smaller components. And by the third, she found herself laughing genuinely for the first time in longer than she could remember, as Pete told increasingly exaggerated stories about her father's reckless younger years. Your old man once rode from Denver to Salt Lake City in one stretch. No stops just to win a bet, Pete said, grinning as he worked a rusted bolt loose. Nearly fell asleep on the bike twice, but he made it, and he never let any of us forget he won that bet for the next 5 years. Dad, Lily said, turning toward her father with mock scandal, you never told me you were reckless. Daniel, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag, gave her a sheepish, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. There's a lot about me you don't know yet, sweetheart. Might take a while to catch you up on all of it. I've got time, she said softly, and something passed between them. In that moment, an unspoken understanding that the years they'd lost to grief and distance and Victor Haynes's cruelty were finally slowly beginning to be reclaimed. Every bolt they tightened together became a small conversation. Every part they replaced seemed to heal some old wound neither of them had fully acknowledged before. Daniel found himself talking more in those 3 weekends than he had in the previous 3 years combined, telling Lily stories about her mother she'd never heard about the early days of his friendship with Jack, about the version of himself that had existed before loss had convinced him to disappear. I'm sorry, he told her one evening, as the two of them sat alone on the porch after the others had gone home, the motorcycle's restoration nearly complete. For all those years I spent hiding. You deserved a father who was fully present, not one who checked out the moment things got hard. You were present, Lily said gently, in the ways you could manage. And I understand now more than I did before how much you were carrying. Losing mom and then everything with the club, all that guilt about Jack, it makes sense that you needed to withdraw for a while. I just wish I'd understood it sooner. Maybe I could have helped. You shouldn't have had to help, Daniel said firmly. I was the parent. That was never your responsibility. He reached over, taking her hand. But I promise you from here forward, I'm not disappearing again. Not from you, not from Jack and the others, not from any of it. By the time the third weekend concluded, the motorcycle sat gleaming in the driveway, restored to something close to its former glory, chrome-polished engine rebuilt, ready to ride again after nearly 2 decades of silence. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings against Victor Haynes and Ronald Kessler moved forward with grinding, deliberate momentum. Federal prosecutors armed with Haynes's own cooperation, Lily's testimony, Marisol's account and evidence from 9 other victims who had come forward built a case that even Whitfield, still nominally representing Victor, privately admitted to colleagues was nearly impossible to defend against. Reyes called Jack periodically with updates, and one afternoon about 3 weeks after the initial confrontation, she called with news that made Jack immediately drive up the mountain to deliver in person. They're charging him with racketeering, Jack told Daniel and Lily, standing in their kitchen, still slightly breathless from the ride up. Haynes, racketeering, wire fraud witness, intimidation, and conspiracy charges related to what happened to Marisol and at least 2 other victims. Reyes says the federal sentencing guidelines, if he's convicted on everything, could mean 25 years, maybe more. Lily sat down slowly at the kitchen table, absorbing the weight of the number. 25 years. Reyes says it's likely he'll plead guilty to avoid a trial given how strong the evidence is, Jack continued. Kessler's facing separate charges for the intimidation, specifically probably 10 to 15 years depending on how his case proceeds. It's not enough, Lily said quietly, though there wasn't anger in her voice, just a kind of tired, hollow honesty. Nothing's enough for what he did to those women, to Marisol's family, threatening them from thousands of miles away. To all of us. No, Daniel agreed, sitting beside her. But it's something, it's justice, even if it can't undo the harm. And it means, Jack added, that he can't do this to anyone else, ever again. Lily nodded slowly, and something in her posture shifted, the weight of months of fear and uncertainty finally beginning to lift, replaced by a fragile but genuine sense that the nightmare she'd endured was finally truly coming to a close. That evening, as the sun began to set behind the mountains, Daniel led Lily and Jack out to the driveway where the restored motorcycle sat, waiting, engine finally rebuilt, ready for its first ride in nearly 20 years. Want to take her for a spin? Daniel asked Jack, a genuine smile breaking across his face for what felt like the first time in ages. Jack laughed, the sound rich with relief and something like joy. Thought you'd never ask, old man. Daniel swung his leg over the bike, settling into a seat that felt both foreign and achingly familiar all at once, and turned the key, holding his breath as the engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life beneath him, a sound he hadn't heard in nearly 2 decades. Lily watched from the porch, tears in her eyes, as her father rode the restored motorcycle in a slow, careful loop around the driveway, Jack following close behind on his own bike. The 2 old friends riding together again, after 19 years of silence and distance, finally fully reconnected. She thought about everything that had happened in the last 3 weeks, about the sheer improbability of 6 whispered words unraveling a criminal operation spanning 3 counties in 6 years, about her father finding his way back to himself, about Marisol finally safe, about 9 other women finding the courage to speak their own truths. She thought about her mother and wondered if somewhere, somehow, Sarah Carter could see what her husband and daughter had become in the wake of tragedy. Not broken, not permanently lost, but slowly, carefully rebuilding themselves into something whole again. As the engines quieted and Daniel pulled the bike back into the driveway, dismounting with a grin Lily hadn't seen on his face in years, he walked toward her, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair, "for remembering, for being brave enough to say those words even when you were terrified. Thank you for giving them to me," she whispered back, "for knowing somehow all those years ago that I might need them someday." Behind them, Jack watched the reunion with quiet satisfaction, thinking about the strange, winding path that had led them all here. A highway crash 20 years ago, a friendship nearly lost to grief, a young woman's courage in a roadside diner, and now finally a family reclaiming itself piece by careful piece, bolt by careful bolt, exactly the way they'd rebuilt that old motorcycle sitting gleaming in the driveway. But even as the evening settled into something peaceful, something almost like closure. Jack's phone buzzed once more in his pocket, and glancing at the screen, he saw Reyes's name appear, along with a message that made his stomach tighten with fresh unease. Need to talk. New development in the Haynes case. Call me when you can. Jack stepped away from the porch phone pressed to his ear, and Reyes answered on the second ring, her voice carrying an edge he hadn't heard from her before. Mr. Donovan, thanks for calling back so fast. You said there's a new development, Jack said, glancing back toward the driveway where Daniel and Lily still stood together beside the restored motorcycle, their laughter carrying faintly across the evening air. Good or bad? Complicated, Reyes said. We found a second set of financial records during the forensic accounting review. Offshore accounts structured to look like international trading partnerships. Haynes wasn't just running a labor scheme, Mr. Donovan. He was funneling money to a network of similar operations in 2 other states, Wyoming and Nebraska. Jack's stomach dropped. Other operations? You mean other Victor Hayneses? Different names, same pattern? We think Haynes was part of something larger, a loose network of operators sharing tactics, maybe even sharing that investigator, Kessler, for cross-state intimidation work. It's going to take months to fully map out, but I wanted you to hear it from me before it hits the news because it means the case is expanding, and it means Lily's testimony just became even more important than we originally realized. Jack closed his eyes, absorbing the scope of what Reyes was describing, feeling the weight of it settle heavy in his chest. What had started as a single frightened young woman whispering 6 words over a coffee cup had become the loose thread that once pulled was unraveling something far larger than any of them had imagined possible. Is she in danger? Jack asked quietly. If this network is bigger than we thought, does that put Lily at risk? We're taking precautions, Reyes said. Increased monitoring, some additional security around her formal testimony dates. I don't want to alarm you unnecessarily, Mr. Donovan. But I also don't want to understate this. Haynes's cooperation has made him valuable to us, which paradoxically makes some of these other operators nervous because they don't know exactly how much he's told us. What do you need from us? For now, just continued vigilance, Reyes said. And I'd ask that Lily avoid unnecessary public exposure until the initial round of depositions is complete. I know that's difficult given the media attention this case has already generated. Jack thanked her, ended the call, and stood for a long moment in the deepening dusk, watching Daniel help Lily off the newly restored bike, both of them still glowing with the simple joy of a father and daughter reclaiming a piece of their shared history. He hated the idea of walking over there and dimming that light even for a moment, but he also knew from 20 years of hard-earned experience that protecting people meant giving them the truth, not shielding them from it. He walked toward them slowly, and Daniel's face shifted the instant he saw Jack's expression. What is it? Daniel asked, his hand instinctively finding Lily's shoulder. Jack told him everything Reyes had shared, watching Lily's face pale slightly as the scope of what she'd uncovered continued expanding beyond anything she could have imagined that Thursday morning 3 weeks earlier. Other states? She said quietly once Jack had finished. How many more women, Jack? How many more Marisols are out there right now hiding, scared thinking nobody's ever going to believe them? I don't know, Jack admitted, but Reyes and her team are going to find out. And when they do, it's going to be because you had the courage to speak first. Lily was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening tree line, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried a steadiness that made both men look at her with fresh admiration. Then I'll testify, she said, whatever they need, however many times they need me to say it. If there's a chance my voice helps find even one more woman like Marisol, it's worth whatever risk comes with it. Daniel pulled her close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, though Jack could see the fear flickering behind his old friend's eyes, the fear of any father watching his child choose courage over safety. We'll be right beside you, Daniel said. Every step. Every single one, Jack agreed. The weeks that followed tested that promise in ways none of them fully anticipated. Lily's name and face, despite Reyes's best efforts to protect her privacy, became increasingly public as the case expanded, national outlets picking up threads of the story, painting her, somewhat to her discomfort, as a symbol of quiet courage against institutional cruelty. She gave 4 separate depositions over 6 weeks, sat through hours of preparation with federal prosecutors, and twice had to sit within 20 feet of Victor Haynes himself, watching the man who had once controlled every aspect of her life reduced to a hunched, defeated figure in a rumpled suit stripped of all his earlier arrogance. The second time she saw him in a federal courthouse hallway during a recess, he tried to catch her eye. Opened his mouth like he might say something, some final attempt at manipulation or apology, she couldn't tell which. She simply looked through him the way she might look through a stranger on the street and kept walking, Daniel's hand steady on her shoulder the entire way. "You okay?" Daniel asked once they'd cleared the hallway. "I thought seeing him again would scare me," Lily said, surprise coloring her voice. "It didn't. I just felt nothing, like he doesn't have any power over me anymore." "Because he doesn't," Daniel said firmly. "Not anymore, not ever again." Marisol Vega's own testimony, delivered 3 weeks later, under careful federal protection, proved devastating for the prosecution's case against both Haynes and Kessler. Her account of threats against her family, delivered with a quiet, unshakable dignity that reportedly left even hardened courtroom observers visibly moved. Jack attended that hearing, sitting several rows back alongside Cole and Pete, a silent show of support Marisol had specifically requested once she learned the men who'd found her in Pueblo were connected to Lily's case. "I want them there," she told Reyes. "The men who found me. I want to see faces I trust in that room." Reyes had granted the request, and when Marisol finished her testimony, stepping down from the witness stand with tears streaming freely down her face for the first time since the ordeal began, she walked directly toward the small group of bikers seated in the gallery, and Jack found himself enveloped in a fierce, grateful embrace from a woman he'd never actually met in person until that moment. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on finding me." "We'll never stop looking out for people who need it," Jack said simply. "That's just what we do." The investigation into the broader network spanning Wyoming and Nebraska moved forward with grinding but steady momentum over the following 2 months. Federal agents in both states working from the financial trail, Reyes's team had identified similar operations, similar patterns of predatory contracting and wage theft, similar victims too frightened or isolated to have ever reported what they'd endured. By the time autumn arrived, painting the Colorado mountains in brilliant golds and reds, the combined investigation had identified 23 total victims across 3 states and secured cooperation agreements from 2 additional operators eager to reduce their own sentences by testifying against the network's remaining structure. Victor Haynes, facing the overwhelming weight of evidence and testimony arrayed against him, ultimately accepted a plea agreement rather than risk trial. 22 years federal prison, no possibility of parole before serving at least 18. Ronald Kessler, convicted separately on witness intimidation and conspiracy charges, received 14 years. Reyes called Jack personally the day the sentences were finalized, her voice carrying a note of professional satisfaction rarely present in their earlier, more urgent conversations. "It's done," she said. "Both of them sentenced, no appeals pending that are likely to succeed. I wanted you to know before it hit the news." Jack, standing on Daniel's porch when the call came through, felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for months. 22 years. For Haynes, yes. And the broader network investigation continues, but the core cases, the ones directly tied to Lily's testimony, are fully resolved. A pause, and when Reyes spoke again, her voice had softened slightly. "Mr. Donovan, I've worked cases like this for 15 years. Most of them end quietly, victims disappearing back into private lives, trying to forget what happened to them. This one's different. What your organization did that morning, showing up, staying, refusing to let this get buried the way 11 prior complaints got buried, that changed the outcome entirely. I wanted you to know that." "We just did what family does," Jack said quietly. "Showed up when someone needed us." "Well," Reyes said, 23 women are safer tonight because of it. I hope that means something." "It means everything." He walked inside to share the news, finding Daniel and Lily in the kitchen, the warm smell of dinner cooking filling the small cabin, a scene of ordinary domestic peace that would have seemed impossible 3 months earlier. Lily looked up as he entered, reading something in his expression immediately. "It's over," she said, not quite a question. "It's over," Jack confirmed. "Both of them sentenced. Haynes got 22 years, Kessler 14. Lily set down the spoon she'd been holding, gripping the kitchen counter for a moment, absorbing the weight of hearing those numbers spoken aloud, the final punctuation mark on months of fear and uncertainty and courage. 22 years, she repeated softly. That's... She trailed off, unable to quite find the words for what she was feeling. "That's justice," Daniel finished for her, crossing the kitchen to pull her into a fierce embrace. "That's real justice, sweetheart. For you, for Marisol, for every woman he ever hurt." Tears spilled down Lily's cheeks, though her expression carried more relief than sorrow. Now the particular exhaustion of someone finally allowed to set down a burden she'd been carrying far too long. "I keep thinking about that morning," she said once she'd composed herself enough to speak. "How close I came to just staying quiet. If I hadn't remembered those words, Dad, if I'd just kept my head down and kept working, none of this would have happened. Marisol would still be hiding. Those other women might never have come forward." "But you did remember," Daniel said gently, "and that's what matters. Not the version of events that might have happened, the version that actually did." Jack watched this exchange with quiet satisfaction, thinking about the strange, improbable chain of events that had led them here, a highway crash 2 decades earlier that had nearly cost him his life, a friendship nearly lost to grief and distance, a father's strange, seemingly nonsensical instruction to his teenage daughter, and finally a moment of desperate courage in a roadside diner that had unraveled a criminal network spanning 3 states. "You know," Jack said, "I've been riding with this club for over 25 years, seen a lot of things, helped a lot of people, but I don't know that I've ever seen anything quite like watching 6 words turn into this. 23 women getting their lives back." "It wasn't just the words," Lily said, wiping her eyes. "It was you, all of you, showing up, believing me, refusing to let it get buried." "I said 6 words, Jack, but you and your brothers did everything else." "We just opened the door," Jack said. "You're the one who walked through it. That took more courage than anything the rest of us did." Daniel, watching this exchange between his daughter and his oldest friend, felt something settle deep in his chest, a peace he hadn't known in nearly 2 decades. He thought about the years he'd spent isolated on this mountain, convinced that grief demanded solitude, that healing meant withdrawing from everyone who might remind him of what he'd lost. He understood now with painful clarity how wrong that instinct had been, how much connection and community had been waiting for him the entire time, if only he'd had the courage to reach for it. "I want to do something," Daniel said, suddenly breaking the quiet moment. "For Marisol, for the other women. Something more than just testimony and legal proceedings." Jack raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, thinking, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the particular conviction of a man who'd finally found purpose after years of aimless grief. "A foundation," he said. "Something that helps women get out of situations like this before it takes federal agents and biker gangs and a small miracle to save them. Legal resources, emergency housing, job placement. Something real. Something that outlasts this one case." Lily's face lit up with the first genuine excitement Jack had seen from her since the ordeal began. "Dad, that's a beautiful idea." "We'd need help," Daniel said, looking at Jack. "Resources, connections, people who understand this world in ways I've forgotten how to." "You'd have all of it," Jack said immediately without a trace of hesitation. "Every chapter within 3 states would show up for something like that. We've spent decades helping people one crisis at a time. Something permanent, something that actually prevents the next Victor Haynes from getting this far before someone stops him. That's exactly the kind of thing this brotherhood exists for." Over the following months, that idea slowly took shape, growing from a quiet conversation in a mountain kitchen into something concrete and real. Daniel, drawing on savings he'd let sit untouched for years, along with contributions from the Iron Wolves chapter, and eventually donations that poured in from across the country. Once word of Lily's story spread, further established the Sarah Carter Foundation, named for the wife and mother whose loss had once driven him into isolation, now transformed into something that might prevent other families from experiencing similar suffering. Marisol Vega, once her own legal situation stabilized and her family's safety in Mexico was fully secured, became the foundation's first staff member, working directly with women navigating exploitative employment situations, offering the kind of practical, informed support that came from having survived exactly what they were living through. "I never thought I'd be the one helping others," she told Lily during the foundation's first official event, a modest gathering held in Denver 6 months after that Thursday morning at the diner. "I thought I'd spend the rest of my life just trying to disappear, trying to forget. Instead, I get to make sure fewer women have to go through what we went through." Lily, standing beside her old father, watching the small crowd of survivors, advocates, and Iron Wolves members mingling together at the foundation's launch, felt something she hadn't expected to feel again so soon after everything that had happened. Genuine hope. "Dad," she said quietly, leaning against his shoulder, Do you think Mom would be proud of this, of what we built from all of it? Daniel's eyes grew wet, and he wrapped an arm around his daughter, pulling her close. I think your mother would be proud of both of us, sweetheart. Not just for what we built, for finding our way back to each other and back to the people who love us after everything that tried to keep us apart. Jack, standing a few feet away, with Cole and Pete, watched the two of them with quiet satisfaction, thinking about the 20 years of distance that had once separated him from his oldest friend, distance that a single desperate phone call and a chain of impossible circumstances had finally fully closed. You know, Pete said quietly, following Jack's gaze, never thought I'd see Daniel Carter standing at something like this, talking, laughing, building something real again. Grief doesn't have to be permanent, Jack said. Sometimes it just takes the right person reminding you that you're allowed to come back. 1 year to the day after Lily Carter had first whispered 6 words over a cup of coffee, Daniel rode his restored motorcycle down the same stretch of Interstate 70 where everything had begun. Lily riding behind him, her arms wrapped securely around her father's waist, both of them smiling into the crisp autumn wind. Jack and nearly 40 other Iron Wolves members rode alongside them, a full escort winding through the Colorado mountains beneath clear blue skies, marking the anniversary not with sorrow but with celebration. They stopped briefly outside the old diner, now under entirely new ownership. The building repainted, the atmosphere transformed into something warmer, safer, a place where new employees worked under fair conditions and honest management, thanks in part to the state's increased scrutiny following Haynes's conviction. Lily stood outside the building where she'd once felt so trapped, so alone, and felt nothing but a strange, peaceful sense of closure. Feels different now, she said, looking up at her father. Everything does, Daniel agreed. That's what happens when you find your way through the darkest parts. The world doesn't look the same afterward. Usually looks better, actually, because you finally understand how much you are capable of surviving. Jack walked over, standing beside them, looking at the diner with his own complicated mixture of memory and relief. 1 year, he said, feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. It's strange, Lily said. I used to think about that morning as the worst day of my life. All that fear, all that uncertainty. Now I think about it as the day everything actually started getting better. The day I finally stopped being afraid. That's what courage does, Jack said. It doesn't feel like courage in the moment. Usually just feels like terror you push through anyway. But looking back, that's exactly what it was. The foundation, in the year since its founding, had already helped 43 women navigate exploitative employment situations, providing legal resources, emergency housing, and job placement services across 3 states. Marisol had become its full-time director, and requests for assistance continued arriving, weekly evidence of a need far larger than any of them had initially anticipated, but also evidence of hope of women finding the courage to reach out to ask for help, because they'd seen proof that speaking up could actually change everything. Reyes, who'd stayed in occasional contact throughout the year, sent Daniel a message on the anniversary, simple and heartfelt, thinking of you and Lily today. What started as one brave sentence became something that's genuinely changing lives across 3 states. Proud to have been part of it. Daniel read the message aloud to Lily as they sat together that evening back at the cabin, the restored motorcycle parked proudly in the driveway, catching the last golden light of the setting sun. She's right, you know, Daniel said, setting down his phone. 1 sentence, 6 words, and look at everything that grew from it. I still think about it sometimes, Lily admitted. How close I came to staying silent that morning. If that motorcycle hadn't been parked outside, if I hadn't recognized it, if I'd been too scared to actually say anything. But you weren't too scared, Daniel interrupted gently. That's the part that matters, sweetheart. Not the fear you felt, the courage you found anyway right in the middle of it. Lily leaned against her father's shoulder, watching the sun sink behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and violet, and thought about everything the last year had taught her. About the strength that had been inside her all along, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. About her father rediscovering himself after nearly 2 decades of grief-driven isolation, finding his way back not just to her, but to an entire brotherhood that had never stopped loving him, even through his longest silences. About Marisol and the 22 other women who'd found their own courage because Lily had found hers first. About Jack, whose 20-year-old guilt had transformed through one impossible morning into a legacy of protection that would likely outlast all of them. Dad, she said quietly, I think I finally understand why you taught me those words all those years ago. Why's that? Because you knew somehow that the world could be cruel, and that sometimes the people who love us most can't always be there to protect us directly. But you gave me a door anyway, a way to reach the people who could help even when you couldn't be there yourself. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, and he pulled his daughter into a tight, grateful embrace, feeling the full weight of everything they'd built together in the wake of near catastrophe. That's exactly why, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Because a father's love doesn't end where his physical presence does. It finds other ways to reach the people he loves most, even from a distance, even after years of silence, even when he's forgotten how to show up the way he should. Behind them, the sound of motorcycle engines rumbled faintly in the distance. More Iron Wolves members arriving for the small gathering planned that evening, a celebration not just of justice served, but of family reclaimed, of brotherhood, restored, of a foundation built from tragedy that now stood as a beacon for women who might otherwise have suffered in silence. The Sarah Carter Foundation sign, newly installed outside its modest Denver office, caught the last light of the setting sun gleaming softly against the autumn sky, a permanent testament to a woman whose memory had once driven her husband into isolation and now, transformed by love and courage and an unbreakable brotherhood, drove an entire movement toward protecting others from suffering the same darkness her family had endured. Victor Haynes would spend the next 2 decades in federal prison, stripped of every ounce of power he'd once wielded over frightened, isolated employees. Ronald Kessler would serve his own sentence, his career of intimidation and threats finally permanently ended. And across 3 states, the broader network their case had exposed continued unraveling, investigators building case after case from the foundation Lily's courage had first established. But none of that mattered nearly as much in the end as what had been rebuilt in its place. A father and daughter reconnected after years of quiet distance. A brotherhood proven once again to be exactly what it claimed to be, family that showed up without hesitation, without question, the moment one of their own needed them. And a foundation born from tragedy, now standing as living proof that 6 whispered words, spoken with trembling courage on an ordinary Thursday morning, could ripple outward into something powerful enough to change dozens of lives and strong enough to ensure that no woman who walked through the Sarah Carter Foundation's doors would ever again have to face her darkest moment entirely alone. Some cries for help are never spoken aloud in the way people expect. Sometimes they arrive as 6 carefully remembered words passed down from a father who understood long before his daughter ever needed them, that love sometimes has to plan for the darkest possibilities in order to guarantee protection when it matters most. And sometimes when those words finally find the right ears, when a brotherhood forged over decades chooses to show up without hesitation, for a stranger who turns out to be family after all, an entire network of suffering can be exposed, dismantled, and replaced with something far stronger than the fear that built it. This story is finished, justice was served, a family was restored, and the door Daniel Carter once promised his daughter all those years ago remains open, still ready for the next person brave enough to walk through it.